Okay, come on in. There are lots of seats down here. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Terry Garcia, the Chief Science and Exploration Officer here at National Geographic. We're delighted to have you here with us this afternoon. National Geographic has been working with David Hayes and his team at the Alliance for about a year now, and it's gratifying to see the enormous progress that's been made over this last year due to the work of David and Sarah and the other members of the Alliance, and that's all evidenced by the fact that you guys are here with us today. National Geographic has been supporting scientists and conservationists and telling their stories to the world for more than 128 years now. While we've had a constant focus on wildlife, recently we've begun to examine the growing problem of illicit trade in wildlife. And most of you in this audience are probably familiar with the facts, but I don't think it hurts to reiterate some of those in a public forum like this. Number one, it's big business. Illegal wildlife trafficking is estimated to be worth about $19 billion globally each year. Armed conflict can exacerbate wildlife trafficking and killing. In fact, it can be a rich source of financing for terrorist groups such as the Lord's Resistance Army. The thin green line, the park rangers, do their best to try to protect the wildlife, but in many cases they're outmanned and outgunned. And over the last decade, approximately 1,000 rangers have been killed defending wildlife. In developing countries, wildlife trafficking undermines local and regional stability. It threatens tourism and associated revenue that's needed for conservation and community development. Globally, hundreds of millions of individual animals belonging to hundreds of species are targets of illegal harvesting and trade. Wildlife and wildlife parts are consumed as exotic pets, trophies, luxury items, religious items, food, and medicine. In the case of elephants, the illegal ivory trade has increased nearly 300% from 1998 to 2011. 100,000 elephants were killed in the 3-year period from 2010 to 2012. The situation with rhinos is also dire. The number of rhinos poached annually increased more than 9,000% from 2007 to 2013. This is the reason that we're all here this afternoon. So for National Geographic's part, we're going to continue to use our scientific and educational and media assets to look for solutions, but also call public attention to this problem. Just as National Geographic magazine did in September 2015 with a special investigation that was led by National Geographic fellow Brian Christie, who used fake tusk and embedded GPS devices to trail African elephant poachers and to track the route of illegal ivory. And tied to these stories, we have produced a number of television shows and will continue to do so around the issue of illicit trafficking. So while elephants and the ivory trade has been a focus of ours, there's also been coverage of other wildlife trafficking issues, which we will continue to do, facing tigers, rhinos, monkeys, other primates. Last year, we launched something we're calling a Special Investigative Unit, which I referenced just a moment ago, which is led by Brian Christie, and its purpose is to, over the next several years, to investigate the global criminal network that allows for the transport of illicit ivory and other wildlife parts. And when I say global criminal enterprise, I mean that. It is truly a vast global criminal enterprise that we're dealing with. In 2014, National Geographic partnered with GlobeScan, a survey firm, to conduct a comprehensive analysis of consumer demand in some of the key markets, the 5 key markets, in fact: China, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and the United States. We made those findings available to the community as part of the Partnership to Save Africa's Elephants, a 3-year Clinton Global Initiative. We're going to continue to track progress with subsequent surveys that are planned in the out years to see if we're having an impact on suppressing demand for ivory products. And as part of our continuing commitment to conservation, we're launching a new program which we're calling the Photo Art Project. That's a multi-year effort by one of our photographers, Joel Sartori. And his ambition is to photograph all 12,000 captive species in zoos around the world, and to use these images, actually portraits, as a way of first recording the existence of these animals, perhaps the only record because many are becoming extinct, but also we hope that it'll be a powerful testament to the public and for the rationale for saving these species. Those of you who will be at the reception later this evening will have a chance to see some of these portraits, which are in the exhibit hall where the reception will be held. And then finally, we're partnering with the Wildlife Conservation Society on what we're calling Forever Elephants, which is the first of its kind effort to bring together all of those who are working in the field focused on the issue of stopping the killing, to see what works and to how we might scale up those programs that are working and modify those that are not. As I said, this is the first of its kind, and it's kind of remarkable to think that we've got all of these conservation efforts out there, and yet if you talk to the scientists and the conservationists in the field, we don't really know exactly which of them are working and how well. So now's the time to act, clearly. The commitments that you all have made today are truly impressive, and it's the first step in what's going to be a long fight. I'm looking forward to the rest of this afternoon and hearing the presentations. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my friend David Hayes, who is the chairman of the U.S. Wildlife Trafficking Alliance. So David, the podium is all yours.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to follow Terry, who has been a pillar of strength here at National Geographic for many years. Terry and I had the honor of working together in the Clinton administration when he was Assistant Secretary at NOAA, and we had a lot of fun together. He hasn't taken me on any of his Egyptian forays yet, unfortunately. But I want to thank Terry and National Geographic for having us here today, for being such great hosts. And in that regard, later today, many of you will be at a reception. I want to thank Google and Google's Johanna Shelton for sponsoring the reception at the Photo Arc exhibit later today. And before I go further, I want to do a special shout out to the Alliance's Executive Director, Sarah Walker. Where are you, Sarah? Stand up, please. Sarah has worked tirelessly on this event, but more to the point, upon the whole effort. And without Sarah, we would not be here today. Now, this is an important journey that collectively we're on, and I want to take a couple of minutes to just review how we got here and where we're hoping to go. Now, all of you know, as Terry mentioned, and as our distinguished guests here will elaborate, the widespread killings of iconic wildlife is truly a global crisis that's threatening the very existence of many of our key species, while fueling literally multi-million-dollar criminal syndicates that are corrupting and destabilizing nations, while also helping to fund terrorist organizations. The seriousness of the crisis came to the President's attention, and as you know, on July 1, 2013, he issued an executive order that established a task force that's co-chaired by Secretary Jewell of the Department of the Interior, Secretary Kerry of the State Department, and the Attorney General Lynch, to develop a national strategy to have a whole-of-government approach for dealing with the wildlife trafficking crisis. And what you're going to hear right after me is the personification of that whole-of-government effort with Secretary Jewel Christie Goldfuss of the Council on Environmental Equality and Undersecretary Novelli of the State Department. The order also established an advisory council of outside experts that Judith McHale and I have had the honor of leading. Now, that national strategy document is an excellent document to review, and there's the, Google it, you'll find it, and it says we need to do everything at all stages to deal with wildlife trafficking. We need to go right to the source of where the poaching is occurring in the range nations. We need to deal with the traffickers themselves, the kingpins who are moving the illicit wildlife products from range nations to buying nations. And it emphasizes that unless we stop the demand in major demand nations, we will not solve this problem. And in that regard, the national strategy said and recognized that the federal government can't do that alone. And in particular, on the demand side, the national strategy said we need to build partnerships to reduce domestic demand here in the United States. If we can do it here, we can show the world that it can be done and that we can shut off demand for these products, change buying behavior, and dry up the market for these illegal traffickers and save our wildlife. So it urged the task force to work with the nonprofit sector, to work with media organizations, and to work with private companies that are in the business, not necessarily intentionally so, but that have supply chains, for example, that may be taken advantage of by wildlife traffickers, and to help work across all of civil society, if you will, to make change. The U.S. Wildlife Trafficking Alliance grew out of that national commitment to bring together the nonprofit community, media organizations, and corporations to work in partnership with the federal government to stop U.S. demand. That's why we're here. And I want to say, first of all, this would never have gotten off the ground without the 4 founding NGO partners who said, raised their hand, even though these folks have their own mature programs, and said, we'll work along these lines. And that included Terry Garcia of National Geographic, number 1. Number 2, World Wildlife Fund with Carter Roberts and Jeanette Hemley. It also included the Wildlife Conservation Foundation with Christiane Semper and John Calvelli, and it included the Wildlife African Foundation with Patrick Bergen. All of them are here, almost all of them are here, Christiane somewhere with thousands of miles away. And then very quickly, many followed with their leadership, and including some important foundations like the Weiss Foundation and Paul Allen's Vulcan Foundation, and essentially all of the groups in this space, they all recognize that together we can do more. We next turned to recruiting corporate members, and early on the Alliance was able to get Google, Facebook, Tiffany & Company, eBay, and Berkshire Hathaway. And then with the help of World Wildlife Fund, and with the help of the International Fund for Animal Welfare, with the help of the Wildlife Conservation Society, and with the help of Resolve, in particular, we started bringing in more companies. And also with the help of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All of these organizations identified companies that they were partnering with in various ways and said, we can bring them into the Alliance as well. This has truly been an effort, a joint effort by a lot of folks. And over several months and leading up to the culmination of March 3rd, World Wildlife Day last month, we announced 16 major commitments by corporations and organizations to help combat wildlife trafficking here in the United States. And I urge you all to read in detail the commitments that these 16 companies are making. You can look at our website, which is www.uswta.org, and you'll see them laid out. Let me just mention them very briefly, though, to give you a little flavor for what we're talking about. We have several corporate sectors involved here, really following from the national strategy that said, let's look, for example, at our retail sector. And we went to the jewelry sector, which traditionally has and historically has sold ivory-related products, exotic skins, animal shells, and other wildlife products, and the accessory and high fashion sector. And immediately we had companies stepping up. The Ridgeline Group and Rio Grande are two Berkshire Hathaway companies who are behind the scenes in the jewelry industry, but literally service thousands of jewelers. They're the manufacturers, they're the distributors that bring the jewelry and the products from the mines to the consumers. You're going to hear some of this later with Mark Hanna talking about giving examples, but they are stepping up their efforts to make sure their supply chains have no ivory and no other illegal products. And they're backed by Tiffany and Companies. They're backed by Signet, which owns Jared's, Zales, and Kay Jewelers. And today, Benbridge Jewelers and Brilliant Earth are also coming into that sector to raise the awareness and to scrub those supply chains. In the fashion industry, Ralph Lauren is stepping up, developing new guidelines in cooperation with the Fish and Wildlife Service to augment the animal sourcing principles that it has been following and to spread the gospel through the fashion industry. It's a really key point here. These companies are the first to raise their hand and say, we'll be industry leaders, we will bring others in our sector together, and we are going to raise everyone's awareness, make sure our supply chains are covered, and also make sure our consumers are aware of what we're doing and why it's important that wherever they buy their products, they ask and make sure that they are not illegal. In the e-commerce sector, another major sector that the national strategy explicitly said, let's try to partner with that sector. Why? Because many wildlife traffickers, as they find pressure to not have their products displayed openly, are looking to trade them on e-commerce platforms. And there we have industry leaders, eBay, Google Shopping, Etsy, all making commitments to adopt best practices to block illegal sales on their platforms, to share their algorithms, to share their practices with others in the industry. And one of my favorites is liveauctioneering.com, which is an e-commerce company that works in the space with auction houses, which have been a particularly vulnerable sector. Liveauctioneering.com was brought to the attention of this issue by the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and their CEO, whom you'll hear from on the first panel, immediately said, I didn't know we had this problem. We're going to get to the head of the parade, and we're going to lead our company and our industry to demonstrate, to keep illegal products off of our platform. Travel sector, JetBlue, the largest carrier in the Caribbean, is preparing public service announcements for passengers. The Adventure Travel Association is working with 1,000 businesses to develop and distribute creative messaging to educate travelers about the illegal wildlife trade. Natural Habitat Adventures and today Hidden Treasure Tours are all joining in this effort. Remarkably, Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited is going to train more than 60,000 crew on their ships about illegal and unsustainable wildlife products. When their passengers stop at their port, they're going to know what they should buy and what they should not buy. And they're going to be joined today by Carnival Corporation and its 10 cruise brands that will educate more than 10 million cruisers about the importance of buying smart. On the awareness, training, and education front, Discovery Communications is following up on their terrific Racing Extinction movie by committing to prepare public service announcements in conjunction with the Alliance and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and working with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is a terrific partner for the Alliance. They represent 230 of the major zoos and aquariums in the United States that serve 180 million visitors per year. If we can get to those visitors and help explain the seriousness of this crisis and what individuals can do to ensure that they are not helping traffickers, we will make amazing progress. So that's the beginning. We're very excited about where we are. And the next step really is to raise awareness generally and to have all of the member companies working with the NGOs, working with the government to talk together about how to tell consumers about this challenge. We have communications experts at Berlin Rosen helping the Alliance. We've developed a tagline, which is Be Informed, Buy Informed, logo to follow. And what we are hoping for is that while every one of the members will do their own thing in terms of how to communicate with their constituencies, we're hoping for a unified messaging campaign that will demonstrate that we are all across the government, NGOs, media companies, and other companies, that we're all singing off the same songbook. So I'd like to just close by saying this alliance is actually a temporary coalition. Our goal is simply to get this started, to facilitate the national strategy's ambition to have the U.S. lead the way, and to demonstrate that this major consuming nation can end all trade in illegal wildlife products. The NGOs and the companies that are now represented in the alliance will carry on the work in conjunction with the U.S. government once it's fully launched. Although we're a temporary organization, we're not a shy one. We've been guided by a steering committee of key members and again are indebted to, yes, Sarah Walker, who has demonstrated great skill and and just amazing commitment and leadership to the effort. So now I'd like to turn to our guests. We are very fortunate to have the leaders in the government who have been front and center on behalf of the President in pushing the administration's agenda, without which none of this would be happening. First is Christy Goldfuss. Now, her full bio, along with Sally Jules and Kathy Novelli's, are in your programs. I'm not going to repeat them. Let me just say that, as you know, Christy Goldfuss is the White House lead for the environment as the managing director of the Council for Environmental Quality. From day one of her coming on board, whenever this issue came up, her eyes lit up because she cares about this issue and has enabled us, many of the companies here today, to actually have a White House meeting just this morning that demonstrated the commitment of the President and Christy and the whole White House for this effort. Sally Jewell needs no introduction as the Secretary of the Interior. I had the good fortune to be her Deputy Secretary for a few months before decamping to the West Coast. And she's a powerful voice for conservation. And like Christy, from the very beginning on this issue, it's deep in Sally Jewell's bosom that her care about this issue. You saw it last year when she went to Vietnam and China, spoke publicly about the importance of making progress on this issue, and recently in Gabon, in South Africa, and in Kenya, speaking from her heart, wanting to stamp out this wildlife trafficking. And Kathy Novelli, whom I first met last summer, and who, if you plugged her into a socket, she would light up Los Angeles with her interest and passion for this issue. And Kathy has been out on the diplomatic trail, in particular in Beijing and other key demand countries, saying, you also need to take steps. And we're hoping to help give Kathy a stronger hand with more aces and kings by being able to say, here in the United States, this is what is happening. Please, you do it too. We're honored to have the three of them here, and Christy Goldfuss will lead off, followed by Sally and then Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you here today, and thank you, National Geographic, for hosting us. It's just, if we're not going to be in the wild having this conversation, I think this is the next best spot to be surrounded by such inspiring photographs that really remind us what we're talking about today. And then in terms of Secretary Jewell and Undersecretary Novelli, no insult meant to National Geographic and David Hayes here, but these two women are an incredible force. And when you take the power of all three of us really engaged on this issue from the federal government side, I don't think you have any more commitment from President Obama than this force of women. So thank you to you two and your partnership in this. I know we have a long way to go, and this is just the beginning. So I just want to speak a little bit about what we're doing in terms of the White House and the conversation we had earlier today. As David mentioned, eBay, Etsy, Tiffany & Co., Google, JetBlue, Ralph Lauren, to just name a few, came into the White House to talk about the commitments and really the first step we're making together. What we heard over and over again in the conversation today was the need for education. And I kind of probed a little bit. What does education mean? Because it's a big term, and it turns out the reason we keep using a term as broad as education is it has a lot of different facets. Because the problem includes companies that just aren't even really aware of what this problem fully looks like for them. People on vacation who are enjoying themselves and having a wonderful time and want something to remember and aren't really aware and unwittingly purchase things when they're abroad. And then lastly, this big, huge online marketplace that we all love and enjoy, but allows for a certain amount of anonymity and transparency, which we really appreciate, but means it can be hard to really see what's going on and allow the consumer to actually know what they're purchasing before it shows up in their home. So the marketplace for products is complex, it's complicated, it allows a lot of different corners for people to hide in and illegal activity to take place. But with the commitments that we heard from today, there is a real opportunity to shine a light on the problem and show what's going on. The press is starting to wake up to this too. As we heard recently, a man in New York State, a 77-year-old man, admitted to buying and selling elephant tusks. But that omission, or that ability for him to talk about that crime exposed all the other things that he had been doing as well. He had a narwhal tusk, which he sold for $8,000, 2 elephant tusks, 1 carved elephant ivory art object, one more elephant tusk, a hippo ivory carving, an elephant ivory musician carving, a bronze and elephant ivory figurine, and 1 elephant triptychs and 1 carved coral figurine. So you added up his whole array of products, and it was about $142,000. That's a pretty good size problem for one person and all the animals, and that's all that we were able to find that he had. As you can imagine, as each of these items is sold to a broker, it gets more and more complicated to track who gets it next and how big this problem is. What the companies today have stepped up to do will go a long way to shining a light on the problem and the questions that we just started to surface. They can give consumers the warning before they purchase a product. They can give us the questions to ask when we're out there as consumers to find out more information before we make a purchase, whether we're here at home or whether we're traveling abroad. And that's what they're doing. But we're just starting to do our part, and with 10 months left, the Obama administration, across all portions of the government, is really moving as fast as we can to activate some of the commitments we've made. In fact, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service confiscates thousands of pounds of illegal wildlife products entering the country every year. We heard Secretary Jewell talk about the repository just outside Denver, where people can actually go see pretty much every animal that you could imagine and the products that are made from them. And it's a really heartbreaking experience to see what these things are turned into. The President's wildlife trafficking strategy helped to strengthen enforcement, build international cooperation and commitment, and ensure the United States is leading the way. Leading the way in exposing the problem, leading the way in enforcement, and leading the way in education. In 2013, President Obama issued an executive order establishing a task force, co-chaired, as we heard, by Secretary Jewell, to lead the federal government's comprehensive approach to combating wildlife trafficking. Since then, we've ramped up our work both across the federal government and internationally. Last summer, the President announced a proposed rule which would result in a near total ban on the commercial trade of African elephant ivory in the United States. And in September, he negotiated a similar commitment for a near total ban from China. We look forward to getting our rule across the finish line in the near future. We've also strengthened and protected status of some of the world's most iconic species in trade, from leading efforts to strengthen protections for sharks and manta rays, to expanding technical assistance to help Peru stand up its new National Forest and Wildlife Service that will help protect unique animals like parrots and primates. And then lastly, I just want to mention briefly the President's Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which presents a historic opportunity to protect wildlife and the environment. The deal has specific standards to expand partner countries' obligations to enforce their own conservation laws and step up enforcement on illegal wildlife trafficking. This is why we're trying to lead by example and get others to do what we enforce here. These standards protect animals such as elephants, pangolins, rhinos, and tigers, as well as enforcement standards for illegal fishing. Lastly, this issue is really important to me. That light in the eyes that David was referencing goes back to the experience that I have two little children, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. Very early on in my relationship with my husband. My husband would laugh at that. With my husband, we got to go on a trip to Africa, and we saw at Ngorongoro Crater the most amazing elephants, the most amazing experience traveling with a pack of lions. We went to Rwanda, where my sister was living at the time, and had the experience of hiking with the silverback gorillas. Really life-changing experiences that led to the point of the work I'm doing right now. And the idea that my two children wouldn't have that experience is just devastating. And I know that's the motivation that we hear from the President all the time as well. Really making sure when it comes to climate change, when it comes to an issue like this, when it comes to all the work that we do, we think about what we can do right now to make sure that we can protect this incredible wonder for future generations. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And then I would love to introduce my partner in crime and the woman who's leading this effort with the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, Secretary Sally Jewell.
Well, thank you, Christy and Terry and David, for your great remarks, and I look forward to Kathy's as well. National Geographic is such a wonderful organization that has brought species of the world and the cultures of the world to light for all of us for our entire lives. So, Terry, can't think of a better place to be than right here, and I look forward to the only escape I really get from this job is when I'm reading my National Geographic. Of course, it's not really an escape. It just makes me more educated to do my job better. And to David and Sarah, thank you so much for your work on this alliance, and members of the Advisory Council led by Judith McHale and David. You have really moved us forward, as have my colleagues within the Department of Interior. Lady Beelan is here, Dan Ash, head of the Fish and Wildlife Service. His team, led by Bill Woody on the law enforcement side. These are people very, very dedicated, both career and political staff that are working closely with us on the ground. You've heard statistics from Terry. This is a huge problem, and you know, the elephants and the rhinos are the species that everybody can identify with, but there's so many more that people don't know about, like the opening slide on David's presentation that showed pangolin scales. I didn't know what a pangolin was until I took this job, and I sure do now. And the totowaba, which are being killed for their bladders, and the wiping out of the vaquitas, smallest dolphin species in the world, because they're getting caught up in the nets of those going for the totowaba, and their work with Mexico there. It just goes on and on. You know, shark fin soup that is wiping out shark species. We really have to educate ourselves and educate the world, and that's what this effort is all about, because it is unbelievably complex. It's very challenging. People, at least in this country, seem to have a penchant to enjoy sound bites and not complexity, and it is our job to help educate them that this is something that they need to care about too. This black market trade is thriving in the United States of America. We are part of the problem. We are a source country, we are a transit country, we are a demand country. And that is a message that I've taken with me to Mexico, to Vietnam, to China, to Gabon, to Kenya, and to South Africa. Because we can't wag a finger at these countries saying, you got to clean up your act, we got to clean up our own act, and we can't do that without their help. And so I have asked for their help and their partnership. And it has been a really gratifying experience. You know, this is not something that is just a threat to the species. As Terry alluded to in his remarks, this is a problem of national and international security. Those who traffic in human beings and traffic in drugs and other illicit items are the ones who are trafficking in wildlife products. They are the kingpins of illicit trafficking around the world, and they are the source of money behind many of the illegal activities that we see going on around the world that take the lives and the livelihoods of so many people around the world, especially those most vulnerable. The Fish and Wildlife Service launched Operation Crash, which is continuing. It's an ongoing international criminal investigation and national criminal investigation. It has brought some people to justice, like the one dealer in Philadelphia where we seized a ton of ivory, which we crushed in front of a live audience and people watching online in Times Square in New York City to raise awareness about this is not okay. And that is what so many of the businesses that have joined in this Wildlife Trafficking Alliance get, and what they are bringing to their supply chains, to their customers, in helping people recognize that when we buy these products, we are fueling this problem. And I don't think anybody that is well aware of this would want to be part of that issue, much as we saw some decades ago in the fur industry. So Fish and Wildlife Service has 5 few but mighty law enforcement attaches around the world, places like Bangkok and Dar es Salaam and Gaborone and Beijing and Lima. And they cover countries within their region. And as I learned on a trip to Africa, many times when the law enforcement officials in those countries aren't sure if they can call their neighboring country and get somebody that is honest and not involved in trafficking themselves, they'll go through that attaché at the Fish and Wildlife Service, or they'll go through somebody at the U.S. Embassy who is making those connections so that those people can be brought to justice. I saw it firsthand, and meeting these people, and you know, law enforcement at every level is highly risky, particularly in this business, but they're putting themselves in harm's way to do that. I will also say, as I visited the demand countries, particularly Vietnam and China, and the source countries, particularly Gabon, Kenya, and South Africa, I saw both the worst of mankind and the best of mankind at work. And it was very gratifying to see how these countries and how individuals that are so committed are making a huge difference. In Gabon, I met Mike Fay, explorer in residence, I think, for the National Geographic, who's running the offshore Gabon Bleu program. He told me, you know, he's done these transects across Africa to document animals, but he also has slept in a tent pretty much continuously for many years. So when he was here for a year with National Geographic, he slept in Rock Creek Park with a special permit from the Park Service. Thought I'd throw you that out as he's a hero in many ways. Glad there, yeah, oh, absolutely, there was a permit. He wouldn't have done it without. I said, where'd you shower? And he said, mostly Nat Geo, but you know, the Park Service offered me their U.S. Park Police shower facilities if I needed them. So, you know, it's, if he sleeps in a hotel, he sleeps on the floor. The bed's just too uncomfortable. So, but I saw in Gabon the incredible efforts going on preservation and preventing illegal logging and wildlife trafficking and poaching that is coming across the borders from countries that have been taken over in many cases by these armed insurgent groups. In Kenya, I saw the most incredible efforts on the part of the Northern Rangelands Trust to work with local farmers and communities so that protecting these iconic species was in their best interest. And that's difficult to do because elephants can make rough time out of crops. Rhinos are not easy to live next door to, and neither are lions. And we have some of the same issues with wolves and grizzly bears in some of our own states. But educating people about the benefit of these animals and seeing a path forward, as has been done in a number of countries in Africa that are benefiting from the tourist trade, and ecotourism is a way that you can align interests. And I saw that in a very, very good way in Kenya. In South Africa, I went to a heart-wrenching scene of rhino poaching, a crime scene. Unfortunately, it was one of three we could have picked within about a 20-minute drive of the park headquarters in the northern side of Kruger National Park. Rhinos, which South Africa did such a great job of bringing back from the brink of extinction, are now being wiped out at the rate of almost a couple thousand a year. And so we saw that up close, but we saw that thin green line of law enforcement that is so dedicated with some pretty sketchy equipment, but hearts that, you know, would fill this room, who are saying this is our future, who are dealing with these poachers, who are going out with the veterinarians, as I got an opportunity to do, to tranquilize mother rhino with, who was very pregnant, to put tags on her, to drill tags into her horn, to track her movements so that in the unfortunate situation, should she be poached, there's an opportunity to bring the people to justice that did that. This is the best of mankind and the worst of mankind juxtaposed in the same place. In Vietnam, I met with the Prime Minister. I met with many other leaders who don't want to be viewed as part of the problem, who want to be part of the solution and are looking for a path forward. I went to the Cuc Phong National Park in Vietnam, where they have a pangolin recovery center, a primate recovery center, and a green turtle recovery center, where they are bringing school groups out to educate those groups. This kind of work is happening throughout the world. It is not unique to our country. It is happening everywhere, and that is the best of mankind that I saw. So we've got to keep this up, and we've got to address it here at home and as well. And a big part of that is around public education. So I want to thank the businesses that have signed up in this alliance, and I want to encourage you to make this tent as big as it can be so that businesses like the ones represented here recognize that the reputation of the United States is at risk here. The reputation of brands is at risk. And through education, just as happened, as I mentioned, in the fur industry, or just as Teddy Roosevelt recognized when he was president back at the turn of the last century, starting the National Wildlife Refuge System as we were wiping out our own bird species because of their use in plumage in ladies' hats, that we don't always make smart decisions as human beings, and we need to learn from that. I would invite you all out to the Wildlife Repository just outside of Denver at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge, where you will find tortoiseshell glasses, belt buckles. You'll find cowboy boots, where you'll recognize the brands made from threatened and endangered species. You'll find items of furniture, traditional medicines, whole heads of every species you can imagine, rugs made out of every species you can imagine. It will turn your stomach and break your heart. And I've said to the people out there, if you find a fashion brand on that, I want you to put it on the table up front and center and make sure that everybody comes through there and knows that this brand is associated with those products. Because people need to be educated that this is not okay. And most of the time, I will give people the benefit of the doubt and assume it's just a lack of education. So I can't think of a finer group of people than those that are up here, nor those that are in the audience here, for making this case so effectively. We have a couple of senators, Chris Coons and Jeff Flake, who were out in Africa themselves looking at this, and we will need their help to shape the laws of this country to make sure that they facilitate what we want to do. Christy ran through what the president has done through his executive order, and all of this, we will get this stuff across the finish line. You have heard from David about all of the partners in the private sector. You've heard from a number of folks about the partners in the NGO sector. It takes a village, folks, to deal with this issue, and I can't think of a better village of people to be a part of than this. And last, I will mention that just getting out there and educating and doing these things we've talked about don't give us the kind of hammer that we have in doing business with the United States. And so we heard from Ambassador Froman this morning, U.S. Trade Representative, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and the Trade Promotion Authority, or TPA. TPA has passed, TPP is pending. Both give us tools in our trade agreements to say that if countries violate international laws around the Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species, or CITES, If they traffic in these products, we can bring the full power of trade sanctions against them. Not just trade in those products, but all trade. That is huge. And that is a story that we would look forward to you helping tell out there, because it hasn't been told generally as people have discussed these trade agreements. There's a lot of negatives that people talk about trade. Trade is a powerful way to make sure that we elevate labor standards, environmental standards, and wildlife standards around the world, not to mention illegal fishing, illegal logging, and other illicit activities that are unfortunately thriving around the world, but we can do something about. So during the time that we've been talking to you, at least one elephant has been killed, probably 3 actually, because we'll be up here for 45 minutes or so. Perhaps another rhino has been poached. We've got to do something about this. You are part of the choir. You're part of the foot soldiers that are doing that. We look forward to joining you in this effort. I look forward to continuing this even after I turn into a pumpkin at the end of this administration, just as my colleague David Hayes has, as he's gone out into the private sector from the public sector and done such a good job. So thank you all for being here, and with that, I will introduce our final speaker, Kathy Novelli, the Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. Kathy.
Well, thank you. My voice isn't normally this deep, but I have laryngitis, and I'm trying to imitate the almost extinct frog in Africa, so just for a little color. I want to thank David Hayes and the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance for putting together this whole coalition, and to Terry Garcia for National Geographic. And Terry knows that my love of wildlife really was fueled by reading National Geographic magazines as a kid, and I've carried that with me through my career, and it's a great privilege to be able to work on these issues now and really try to do what we can to pull together all of society to work on saving these animals that are the gift to all of us. And I think everything that everybody said so far today just reinforces that there's no one leg of the stool that's going to be able to do this by itself. It's really got to be an all of the above approach. And the NGO community has been active for a long time, and I see some of my colleagues here who have just been passionate about this, and they've done an incredible job in organizing in countries in Africa. Governments have been active, and I think, there was a bit of a Rubicon crossed in Arusha, Tanzania, a couple of years ago when many 10 governments came together from East Africa and Southern Africa to say, we have to work together. We can't just do this in a vacuum, and that's going to continue to be enlarged. And so now what we have is the private sector coming to bear here, and really bringing the savvy of how to market brands and how to educate their consumers about this, as well as how to look at the 3 kind of key areas that we have to focus on, and that is ending the poaching, ending the transport of these things, and ending demand. And we're all of us working in all of those areas, and I think having that 3rd leg of the stool actually means that we now have a chance to really go forward in a solid way. I think this multi-stakeholder approach also illustrates something that has become very clear to me in looking at this issue, and that is that in the past we've talked about sustainable development, and that has always meant that we have to develop in a way that protects the environment. But we also have to protect the environment in a way that allows for economic benefit. And these things are got to be symbiotic. And I think that is something that it is wonderful to have the private sector involved in. Because if we want to have a situation where people can make a different choice, in their own homeland about poaching, then they have to have alternatives. And so one of the things that I was very gratified to see when I was in Tanzania was the Burungi Wildlife Management Area. And there are a number of these. They're in Zambia and Kenya and elsewhere. But in this one, the Tanzanian government has set up about 19 of these wildlife management areas, and they're right next to wildlife reserves, recognizing that animals don't say, oh, here's the end of the reserve, I better not go any farther unless they're fenced, like in South Africa. And so what's happened is a partnership with the local communities and the NGO community and the government to create sustainable income for the folks living adjacent to these areas, and to actually create income from tourism, which has been incredible because the communities on their hand say that they will not, they won't poach the animals, they won't graze their animals in certain areas to allow for these folks to, these animals to have a place to go, and in return they get a percentage of the amount of revenue that goes to the tent cities that have been erected for tourism along the margins. And this has been used to build schools, it's been used to build clinics, it's been used to fund microloans for women-owned businesses. It's really an incredible example of creatively looking at the intersection of economics and conservation. And it's not the only thing. There are many other types of these intersections, and I think part of what we have to do is figure out how we're going to find more of those intersections so that we can continue to progress. And I am very gratified that we've made a lot of progress. We've made progress with China in getting them to agree that they are going to end the commercial sale of ivory. And thanks to Secretary Jewell and all those working for her, we have a parallel effort here, which helped convince the Chinese that they should actually take action, and it helps us convince other countries to take action as well, as the Secretary mentioned. We've got the announcements by the Alliance about what's going on. We have announcements in Buckingham Palace when Prince William convened companies to look at this, and NGOs as well. And I think the coming together of all of these elements to educate about what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, is absolutely crucial. And the doing of it is also absolutely crucial. So it's not just the talking, it's the doing. And we're so gratified that all of you are here and that you're going to leave here and go out and take action, because that is what is absolutely needed. And it is my privilege to be able to work with the people on this stage and all of you in the audience to try to make a difference. Thank you.
Is this? Yes, it is. Okay. We're going to start with our first panel, which is focused on civil society and corporate engagement with a particular focus on supply chain management. We have 4 panelists. Their bios are in your materials, so I'm not going to review them. But they include Jason Finger, the Chief Executive Officer of LiveAuctioneering.com, Mark Hanna, the Chief Marketing Officer of the Ridgeline Group, Bonnie Borgren, the Policy Director of Etsy, and David London, who is the head of America's government relations for eBay Marketplaces. And all of these companies have made significant steps to ensure that their supply chains are free from illegal wildlife products. They've all joined the alliance and announced additional commitments on World Wildlife Day, March 3rd, along, as I mentioned before, with another 12 important companies in various sectors. All of them have had a relationship with the International Fund for Animal Welfare, one of our key NGO partners in the alliance, who has been a material aid to us and to them in terms of helping them appreciate the issues in their sector because of the IFAW's commitment that they have made to understanding this sector and in a constructive way helping identify the need for improved practices throughout the sector. So I'm going to ask a series of questions of our panelists. First is just to set the groundwork here. I'm going to ask each of our panelists what steps your company has already taken to ensure that your supply chains are free of illegal wildlife products. And Jason, I'll turn to you first.
Sure. Thank you so much, David. That's loud. So I've been involved with live auctioneers now for a little over a year, and was really never exposed to the level of trafficking and the amount of business that was stemming from illegal trafficking. So when I got involved and was made aware of the prevalence of it on our site, we started to introduce a variety of technical as well as sort of manual processes. We introduced artificial intelligence and machine learning to filter these particular keywords that would identify ivory and other trafficked items. And we also introduced some manual processes so that our support team would go through our entire website, basically all the items, to ensure that no items would sort of slip through our filters. And what we found is through a process of partnering automated processes and manual processes, we're able to identify 98% of all illegally listed items on our site. So that's kind of the first thing that we did to introduce anti-trafficking capabilities.
Thank you, Jason. Bonnie, how about Etsy?
Sure. In case anyone doesn't know what Etsy is, we are an online marketplace where creative entrepreneurs around the world can list their items for sale, and buyers can buy directly from those sellers. We currently have 1.6 million sellers and 35 million items listed for sale, so instituting any kind of policy can be a challenge. It's also we don't pre-screen content, so sellers can list items without us pre-screening, so we can't quite control until it's already on the site. So what we did back in 2013, we made a keyword list of automated searches to try and find these species, combined with community flagging. And what I mean by that is anyone in our community can list a flag if they think it violates our policies, and then also manual review. So we banned products made from all endangered species and also all ivory.
Great. David, how about eBay?
eBay is a global company. We have a little over 800 million listings on our site, a little over 162 million users worldwide. As you can imagine, with the breadth and the scope of eBay, that we run into a lot of issues that we want to make sure that we're educating the public on actually their role and responsibilities. So for instance, years ago on eBay, we created a policy page #1, and that's to educate consumers about what to look for when they're looking at items online, not just on our site, but online in general. #2, we've actually looked at users all across the world and asked them to give us feedback. And so, as you all know, I'm sure there's many eBay users in here, and you can give feedback to any seller and also report back to us if you're seeing any infringing item that is actually on our site. And so it's another opportunity we give to users. Back in 2008, we instituted a policy which was a global ban on ivory on our site. And as you can imagine, that went well with almost all of our users, but also too, it could cause some consternation with some of our users who may be using Ivory for some other things. But that's one of the decisions that we made on our site to make sure that we were keeping various products and wildlife trafficking items off of our site. And we continue to look to improve. I think one of the things that we look at eBay is this whole thing is a global issue. It's not just based here in the U.S., as you heard from the previous speakers, but this is a global issue. And only through partnership with law enforcement, NGOs, and other third parties in our community can we continue to solve this problem.
Thank you. And Mark, how about the Ridgeline Group?
Ridgeline is part of the Berkshire Hathaway Company, and I'm going to take a little different stance here. Sarah and David came to us and said, you guys as major suppliers throughout the jewelry industry, as the point of first contact with most jewelers and retailers throughout the country, how can you help? And my first response was, there's no problem. We don't sell ivory. We haven't sold ivory in years. It's the law. But our own slogan is that we are responsible by choice. We're compliant by law, but responsible by choice. And other things that we do, particularly conflict minerals, it's not just about Dodd-Frank. It's about the communities, the people, everybody affected throughout the entire conflict mineral world. And this was the same thing. And we really had not thought of it that way. This was an omission on our part. We looked at our own code of conduct, and we weren't clear. We talked more about biodiversity than we did about wildlife conservation. So it gave us a real wake-up call. And what we decided to do with that wake-up call is realize that we could do the same thing for the rest of the industry. So we started out with what we decided was a campaign of information, confirmation, and dedication. And the information was we lined up every single major trade organization in our industry, from Jewelers of America with 30,000 jewelers throughout the world to manufacturing jewelers with the 10,000 jewelry manufacturers throughout the United States and North America. And we brought the issue to the attention of every one of them. We got them actually to sign on to a statement that we ran ads in every single one of the 5 major trade magazines in the jewelry industry, those approaching retailers and those approaching manufacturers. That's actually the ad, and you can see the organizations across the bottom. We even brought the Fashion Jewelry Association into this, and usually the fine jewelry guys and the costume jewelry guys don't even talk to each other. But, and what we found was a lot of our reaction. Wow, we didn't know this was still an issue. And I'm going to refer to something Terry said earlier, $19 billion. That's the same amount, exactly the same amount, as the total amount of gold jewelry business done in the United States. You see, I want to put it in perspective for us as an industry, that's an awfully big number. So our program really is, we started with the information, running ads. We've run these. We're going to run another series of this throughout the industry, closer to the major trade shows in the summer with retailers. We'll be featuring all the major retailers. They'll be making the same type of commitments, and then that starts connecting us to the consumer. The confirmation is we've also asked everyone to look at their own codes of conduct and adopt, we gave them some sample phrases, but adopt something closer. It brings it to the attention of your entire supply chain. It puts it into all your best practices. It identifies for your associates that's something you expect them to be committed to. And then the last part really is dedication, which that's where it's, I think, to the statement about Secretary Jewell, it's personal. This is personal, and we want everyone to take it personal. We want them to expand it personal from a retailer to consumer and back. And that's where our program is working at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Jason, a question to you. The International Fund for Animal Welfare did an investigative report in 2014 and identified a number of companies, including your company, that do online auction work and raising questions about this issue. You may have been the only one of those companies identified who picked up the phone and called IFAW. Tell us about how that came to be and then what the next steps were.
Sure. So we have a marketplace of about 2.5 million bidders who are actively engaged in buying items through our platform. We have about 4,000 auction houses that participate, and then they live stream their auction. So instead of people physically going to the auction houses post their auctions on our platform and syndicate it to our global bidder base, much like eBay, but for live streamed auctions. And again, I think one of the challenges that are sort of unique or idiosyncratic to live streamed auctions is that items can be introduced at the 11th hour. And so one of the things that we really reached out to the IFAW about was, one, a lot of our auction houses didn't know how to be compliant, what the laws are. There are some federal statutes, there are some statewide statutes, and then they were coming to us and saying, can you help us? We didn't feel like we were expert in that regard, and that was one of the things that prompted us. And then the second thing was, insofar as it was an NGO putting together a consortium of companies, we felt like we could learn what would be best practices by some of the other companies that were out there that might have attacked machine learning, that might have attacked manual processes. And so that was a big part of the impetus for us to reach out. We felt it was both good for our community of buyers, but also just good business.
That's great. And Bonnie, you've worked with IFA also. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, actually, after we instituted the policy in 2013, IFA issued a press release congratulating us and holding us out as an example, along with eBay, of how corporations should behave. And since then, they have asked us to speak on this topic, and they have offered to help us with our enforcement strategy. So they would send us like the top keyword searches we should be looking for, and we would incorporate that into our automated searches. They would also like keep us aware of trends in the industry. And they've just been really great to work with, not only because they are absolute experts in their field, but because they understand our business model. So they're able to actually give us really helpful advice. And they're also just very positive and respectful.
That's great. Now, David, eBay's had partnerships also with NGOs and also with governmental agencies. Can you give us a little more flavor of that?
Yeah, as I said originally, one of the things in order for us to be successful in the site is that we have to have these partnerships. As a matter of fact, and since we're talking IFAW, actually it was a couple of years ago where actually we worked with them in our policy team. They identified some things that were going on our site. And so what we decided to do is make our consequences a lot harder on our site, some of the things that we can actually control. So basically we set up a new process of setting up warning systems. Warning number one, if you are, some people are, I have to be, upfront about this. A lot of people don't know. A lot of our users just don't know. And so sometimes they list something on our site and we just say, this may be an illegal or infringed item. This may be illegal products, just so you know. If that person repeats that the second time, we will give them another warning. If they do it again, the consequences get a lot harder. From that time, it gets to be suspension from our site, and then we'll even work with outside law enforcement to make sure that doesn't happen. So we've worked with them a lot. They've kept us, in a great dialogue over the past few years, and I think the work that they have done has actually educated us at the same time, and also law enforcement. So we've also worked with lots of law enforcement around the world. We obviously work here in the U.S. with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. One of the things that we've been doing with them recently, they came out to one of our customer service sites, actually a former investigator, and trained our team and got them up to speed and actually what to look for on our site. Also in Germany, we work with the Brandenburg police as well, who came out to our site as well and educated our consumers and also our individuals inside the eBay customer service center out there in Germany. So we do a lot of the work there, UK, also internationally, and APAC as well. So I think we have a great partnership with law enforcement. But like I said, it's sort of the three-pronged. It's the law enforcement, it's the community of users that are out there, and it's also incumbent upon us to make sure our site is safe.
So I want to get back to the three of you in the e-commerce space. You've all delivered some tough messages to some of your customers that potentially have affected your business. And curious about how you handle that and whether, whether that's, raised questions in your company or outside your company, and what advice you might have to others who are in your space. Bonnie, let's start with you.
Sure. So at Etsy, we believe business can be a force for good. And this initiative fits squarely in our mission to reimagine commerce in ways that build a more lasting and fulfilling world. And we also believe that taking a stance on social issues isn't bad for your business, it's actually good for your business, because I think we're in a time where buyers, more than ever, want to purchase from a business that they feel ethically aligned with. So the reaction that we got from our community and from the press was overwhelmingly positive. And I think buyers want to buy from a company whose ethics they can get behind. So when you think about it like that, it just makes good business sense.
Mm-hmm. Jason?
So I think along the same lines as that, so we view ourselves as a marketplace where we can disseminate educational information as well. And so about 30% of the buyers on our platforms are what I'll call professional buyers, museums, collectors, et cetera. And then 70% are gift givers and people that are just looking for something unique to buy at an affordable price. And as it relates to our professional buyers, we became the source of education for them. So by us becoming more educated and educating them, they were then able to spread that message to people that might be viewing going to their museum, going to their art gallery or what have you. And similarly on the auction house side, we try to become a teacher and educator for them so that they could not only educate themselves and their peers through their own organizations, but also they could let the consigners or the people that own the item that would otherwise be looking to sell the item via an auction house, let them know what is acceptable and what's non-acceptable behavior. So we try to take the message, the laws, and turn them into a positive message for us so that we could become thought leaders in the marketplace.
It's fantastic. You know, you're leveraging not only your own customers, but then their own supply chains and their own audiences. Enormously powerful. David, what's the eBay story in this regard with customers?
Yeah, our customers have been very supportive of us over the years. You know, anytime we institute a new policy, you can imagine there's some angst. But with this particular issue over the years, they've been very supportive. They understand where it's coming from, and they understand that we need to make sure that we keep our site safe and transparent. There has been some pushback in some small areas, but most of that pushback has been, as I said earlier, you know, some categories such as ivory, antiques. You know, some people don't like some of the changes in the policies that we had, and we had some pushback from some of our sellers. But we said this is the right thing to do by the overall international community. We don't want these products on our site, and I think they understood in the end of the game. But I think we have to understand we have to do a much better job, all of us collectively, of educating our consumers that are out there. But most of the part, they're very supportive of all the information that we put out there. Sometimes we can be a little bit too much heavy on the information side, but we always like to err on that side just to make sure the consumers have the best possible information available.
You know, I should mention that with regard to the e-commerce space, all three of your companies, I believe, have also made commitments to help work with others in your industry to share your information about how you have tackled this problem and potentially collectively raise the standards, if you will, for the entire industry, along with, I should say, Google Shopping, who is also made commitments along these lines. And we very much look forward to working with all of you on that. And I want to ask Mark as a follow-up question to his earlier comment about a similar issue here. With your space in the jewelry industry as a major supplier and distributor, and with your visibility into the entire industry, how is that going? It seems like you're in a unique position to have influence up and down the chain and across the industry. You mentioned a little bit about the advertising that you've done. What are your next steps there, and what do you envision the industry itself, writ broadly, can do in this area?
I think that, you know, we've done a good job of pulling all the organizations together, and each one of the major organizations, I said Jewelers of America and Fashion Jewelry Association, Manufacturing Jewelers, they all now are in the process of putting in the codes, as I referred to earlier, but also, you know, educating their members, not just in wildlife, but also in some of the community and biodiversity issues and things that were not traditionally thought of as being part of your business. And the reputation word got used here a few times today. There's nothing more important and an asset to any type of business than your reputation. And we've been preaching something called return on responsibility for quite a while, which is where does the money come from for social programs? How can you help people here? How can you work on, as we do with some of the NGOs like Resolve and Enough Project, mercury elimination and things like that, that reputation is justified by the return on responsibility of doing the right things. And we think that there are enough organizations and enough great jewelry companies like Tiffany, Mike spoke this morning, that are really working to do the right things. And it proliferates, and it sets by example, and it creates a little bit of a pressure point to follow.
And as a follow-up to that, a little bit of a curveball, but assuming that you've been successful with the major players, the Tiffany's, the Zales, et cetera, Signet Company, and you don't find ivory on most shelves of jewelry stores, but there's a bit of a gray market out there and some smaller players in your industry that may be still selling these items. How can you reach them? Is there a way that your leadership can help reach them?
We talk about the big guys, and that's generally our largest customers, but we're also working with Ethical Metalsmiths, which is an association of about 700 smaller craft jewelers throughout the country who have also taken up this cause with us. And we're hoping that from the grassroots side, through Ethical Metalsmiths and through Fair Trade and Fair Minded, all of which we support, that'll again push from the bottom up what the Tiffany's and Signets can do from the top down. But make no mistake, we need the retailers. It's the retailers that touch the consumer. We don't touch the consumer. So we need them. We need their follow through. And it looks to me like it's going to be there. It's been quite a good reaction.
That's great. So now back to Bonnie, David, and Jason. Just an open-ended question, what are the next steps for each of your companies, singly and together, that you see? Jason, tell us what you see as next steps coming out of where we are today.
Sure. Well, I think we're going to buy eBay and then I'm just kidding. No, yeah, I think that there's an opportunity.
I'll bet on that.
I think that there's an opportunity for all the companies to really collaborate, and a lot of the efforts on filtering, et cetera, are areas where we're all attacking. And I think that this is one where sort of the sum of the parts can be greater than the whole. There's significant synergies if we're able to focus on broadening the message and not focused on each of us trying to create our own technology-related solutions. But I think that as much as we can police things on the supply side, I think that there's an incredibly important demand focus that needs to also happen, because one of the things that David and I were talking about earlier this morning over or earlier meeting was as companies in online marketplaces become more focused on compliance and policing certain policies, gray markets crop up for those. And with a marketplace, very often the largest marketplace, content begets content. And so it's important to have comprehensiveness. And as soon as people are able to buy ivory or other illegal items on another marketplace, and the other marketplace starts drifting into more mainstream things, it necessarily pulls business away from the, quote, honest partners in the marketplace. And so I think that it's incumbent upon all of us in the online world to focus on educating our consumers. And if eBay is educating their consumers, or if Etsy's doing it, or we're doing it, so long as the messaging is consistent and they recognize that it's not, as a buyer, I shouldn't be buying it on any marketplace, then no one legitimate marketplace is at a competitive disadvantage.
And it strikes me that having organizations like IFAW and other NGOs continuing to have an investment in ensuring compliance, they can be a partner of yours in terms of making sure there's a level playing field and that others are not taking advantage of the situation. Bonnie, how about you? Next steps for Etsy?
Sure. So we have what we call inline education. We've just started to build a library, and it's for sellers when they go to list an item for sale. Depending on what category they choose, we determine which categories are at risk for items like this. And we are planning on adding inline education there. So when they go to list an item for sale, a tweet-length text will pop up that alerts them, hey, this might be illegal, this might violate our policies, read this article and find out what you need to do, so that they will get that information before they actually list it for sale on the site. Another thing that we are doing is writing a news blog piece about our efforts in this area and what we've done, and educating our buyers, hopefully reaching that audience in addition to sellers. And then finally, as you mentioned, we are meeting with other e-commerce companies, social media companies, and NGOs to share our enforcement strategy and hopefully learn from each other.
Great. David, next steps for eBay, besides being sold apparently to Jason?
A couple of things that we're going to be working on. As you know, in World Wildlife Day, we made a series of announcements and commitments to move forward as a company. A couple of those commitments are, number one, we're going to really dig deeper and do a lot bigger job on educating our consumers, on our site. So you're seeing some stuff from us in the coming months about how we're going to educate our users on our site, educating them about illegal wildlife trafficking specifically. Secondly, we're going to be looking at new technology. So we'll be partnering with the Alliance and you all here on looking at new technologies, from filtering systems to search, the algorithms, you name it, with things that we all can do better in the internet community. Thirdly, as well, we're going to be looking at doing an online charity auction in the near future, and so raising funds for some of the things that we need to educate people and also to help out on the education process regarding what's going on in online trafficking of illegal goods. Also, too, we're going to hold an online forum, and so it's another partnership that we're having with our brethren in the internet community, having an online forum to educate about what's going on out there. So I think with all these commitments, this is just the first step for us, well, first of many steps for us on this issue, and I think this is going to be the next big step, is continuing to get the public educated. I just want to go back to one of the remarks that was said about the dark sites. I think that's very, very important to say, because all of us up here on the stage are very transparent for what we do. I mean, you can go, we're a well-lit site, you can go there, you can see any product anytime, any day. But what's happening now is that they're going to these other dark sites where you can't find them, you can't find the product, but it's done illegally. And so I think we all have a great partnership with law enforcement in our communities, but I think that's the next stage in this battle, is going to be those sort of third-party sites.
Well, and I'm glad you raised that, David, because as you were saying, it just makes me realize how powerful this coalition is, with the government being directly involved through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, having an appreciation for what your companies, for example, are doing, being able to say, okay, I'm not worried about eBay and liveauctioneers.com and Etsy and Google Shopping. In fact, I want to hear from them if they feel they're being undercut by other organizations that are not being ethical. And that helps them make their decisions about how they utilize their limited resources in an effective way. The other thing that occurred to me is, you're talking to your customers. We've got Mark in the jewelry industry talking to their customers. We're going to have other companies up on the stage in the second and third panel talking to their customers. There's a potential reinforcement here. And we've got the Discovery Channel and National Geographic and others talking to broad audiences, as well as the NGOs, et cetera. It is this potential synergy that I think is particularly exciting. So let me end with a final question, which is along these lines, really. How do we proliferate your good practices throughout the sector? Now, each of you have talked a little bit about that, but I'd really appreciate a bit of an elaboration. And we've got three e-commerce folks, and we've got the jewelry industry here. Is it reasonable to think that all of you as leaders can develop strong expectations of what companies in your space should be doing, and develop those collectively with some of your peer organizations, and put it out there as, in essence, a challenge for businesses that are in your space? And how formal should we get about that? Should we try to come back here in 5 months and celebrate in the jewelry space, in the e-commerce space, some expectations and how far can we go in that respect? I'd love to have each of you answer that. Let's just start with Bonnie and come right down the line.
Sure. Well, I think how we can proliferate this is get the message out there that this is actually not bad for business. Creating a strong ethical brand seems to be what buyers are looking for. Also, I think when we did this project, I noticed that everybody who worked on it, and it was a big cross-company collaboration between our policy team, our legal team, the PR team, our trust and safety team, engineers, and everybody who worked on it was actually really thrilled to work on it. there's a job satisfaction that comes from that kind of work that I think my generation and the millennial generation is looking for. And when you think about it that way, it's actually a really great recruiting tool to be the kind of company that's not afraid to take a stance on social issues like this. And the last thing I'll say is that this kind of attitude comes from the top down. So we were lucky to have a CEO who fully supported this initiative and made sure we got the resources we needed to pull it off. So it starts with your CEO and it starts with your executive team.
So I think creating sort of interim accountability would be great. I think realistically 5 months is a very short period of time, and so I think a lot of tactical moves could be made over the course of the next 5 months. I think that we should all celebrate sort of a major success when the groups within a company that are involved with this initiative are the marketing groups and not the compliance and the behind the scenes group. I think that, in my mind, will be a major breakout moment where we should all really say that a lot of our efforts have been, started to demonstrate some level of success.
Great. Dave?
I'd say a couple of things. First, I think we need to better share best corporate practices that are out there, and I think that's some of the work that we can do with the Alliance and others, is making sure that everybody knows what's going on so we can share, we can learn from each other, and others out there in the online space. I think that's number one. I think number two as well, I think we need to look at law enforcement that's out there. I mean, law enforcement is really underfunded when it comes to a lot of these issues. It's one of the things that we've seen, and our folks that are on the front lines really want to develop some cases with law enforcement. A lot of times they're underfunded, so I think we need to sort of look at, where's the funding levels for various law enforcements around the world that look at wildlife trafficking and see if we can't help them out where we can in their various spaces.
That's a really good point also, and that's one area where the government folks cannot lobby the Congress to ask for more money. That they cannot do that. Companies can go to the Congress and say, this is an important area, and your company's going to be in a position to identify some bad actors potentially, and the frustration of doing that but then having prosecutions not happen is certainly not something you want. So that's something we should talk about as an alliance too. So Mark, how about you going in?
Probably the most important thing that could happen within our industry is 3 weeks ago was the first ever full industry summit on responsible sourcing. And this summit was sherped by the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, which is your policeman for our industry. That's the enforcement group within our industry. That's who works with the FTC, and that's who works pretty much with every kind of problem. Having this adopted as a major clause within the final codes in the Responsible Sourcing Summit, and then paid attention to by the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, who will point out whenever something is found or when anything is out of sorts. This should put a whole new light on the entire topic for our industry. And if I go back to where I started out, we all believe we're completely compliant. We think about elephant, and this just hasn't been the kind of issue it should have been. And we think now it will be, and we know we've got all that attention plus the things I mentioned earlier. So the most important stuff for us right now is to make sure that happens.
Great. So I want to wrap up with one question, final question, and that is dealing with, you've all talked about communicating with your customers, and do you see an advantage potentially about having a unified theme of messaging in this area? We've talked about the new tagline for the Alliance, be informed, buy informed. And could you see, well, I guess I do want to put you on the spot. Could you see potentially your company folding that into some of your communications and working with NGOs, and then would it help you? This is really a leading question. Would it help you if other companies are using some of the same verbiage and communication techniques and NGOs, et cetera? Is there a way? I don't know if this has been done in such an ambitious way before, cross-cutting so many different sectors and NGOs and government players trying to get a message across, with each of you obviously tailoring it to your customer audiences. Is this exciting to you? Is this possible for you? Bonnie, start, and let's go right down the line.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think all of us having a unified voice is something that I wish could have happened earlier. Yeah, let's work together, and I think that will happen when we get together with the other e-commerce companies and social media companies and NGOs next week.
Yeah, I think it's a great goal for all of us to have a shared voice. I think that each industry, and as you categorize this as sort of online marketplaces, but eBay has a unique target audience, Etsy has a unique target audience, and we do as well. And so I think that part of what is going to happen over the course of the next year or so is we'll each gain a greater understanding of the appropriate messaging for our specific target audience. And then hopefully it can be a bilateral communication where we can share with the IFAW and the IFAW can share back with us and all the other NGOs that are out there. And we can then come up with a comprehensive messaging that would make sense that, of course, we could tailor to our specific audience. But I think that would be a great goal.
Well, yeah, I think we need to build up the alliance bigger, because I think that's one of the key things, because all of us want to have a unified message. And I think all the things that you've done, David, and all the work that Sarah's done is really brought light to that. And I think if we continue to sort of double down and work with you all on various goals and targets over the years, I think it'll only happen, it'll be sort of just natural that all of our messaging will be very similar. But having you all and other NGOs and other third-party groups be that voice will be sort of a key piece that we can sort of continue to tap into.
Last word, Mark.
From a commercial perspective, we have proof of concept of that when we are able to unite competitors, and sometimes 20 or 30 of them, across a single message at a single point in time, it raises all ships. It works, and I've got my marketing hat on. So I absolutely subscribe to that across as many places as you can possibly do it.
Great. Let's thank our panelists for... Terrific. Thank you. Panel number 2, come on up.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeanette Himley. I'm the Senior Vice President for Wildlife Conservation at World Wildlife Fund. I'm delighted to be here to moderate the second panel of our big day with the Alliance. I want to congratulate David and Sarah for the terrific work bringing us together to this point after many months of hard work. And Terry, thanks for hosting us again. And thank you to our panelists. So we have 4 leaders from the corporate sector and NGO sector here with us today. Let me introduce them. We have Rob Zeiger, who's the Global Chief Communications Officer from Royal Caribbean Cruises. We have Sophia Mendelson, who's the Head of Sustainability for JetBlue. We have John Calvelli, Executive Vice President for Public Affairs at Wildlife Conservation Society. And we have Patrick Bergen, CEO of African Wildlife Foundation. So thank you all for being here. So, as you heard from David earlier, the companies here, JetBlue and Royal Caribbean, made important commitments that were announced on World Wildlife Day last month. Big commitments to really educating their customers, their consumers, the consumers and potential consumers that use their services. So it's a very big deal, and we're delighted that they have done so. You heard Christy Goldfuss earlier talk about education and the many facets of it, and we're going to talk about that today on this panel. It's going to be obviously a theme throughout this afternoon. Our NGO partners here, WCS and AWF, have prioritized this issue, as have we at World Wildlife Fund in recent years, particularly as the wildlife trafficking and poaching crisis has really spiked. And we're all, I think, delighted to be members of the Alliance and see the great work it's doing to bring together a variety of people across sectors. So we want to talk about how we communicate effectively with our key audiences. And it's not just about raising awareness. I think a lot of our organizations have done that for many years. What we really need to get after, as everyone is hearing about today, is how do you really get people to take action and change their behavior, particularly on the consumer side. I think a challenge that we've all had is how do you engage consumers in a way that motivates them instead of turns them off, and not being preachy or turning them off really with some of the depressing aspects of this issue. I mean, this is obviously a very serious issue. It's one that is jarring and alarming and taken to heart. How can we motivate people to change their behavior in a way that does get them to do that, to really take action? So at WWF, we actually struggled with this question in 2012 as we were preparing to launch our Stop Wildlife Crime campaign. And we wanted to make people aware of this fast emerging crisis and inspire them to action beyond just being aware of it. But we also wanted to be consistent with our brand, which is a positive one. And so we chose to steer clear of images that were depressing, disturbing, as, I mean, many of those are, of course, available on this issue. There's no shortage of them. So our PSA campaign that you see one example of here was one that we deliberately chose, again, as sort of a positive set of imagery and messaging to basically try to convey that this is a serious issue, but it's also one where there's hope if we do take action. And this was kind of a new approach for us on this issue, but one that we thought was pretty effective. It was actually written up in the New York Times as one way to tackle this issue in a way that doesn't use gruesome images. So that's just one approach. There are many others, and we're going to hear about some of those today. So let me turn to the panelists. Let me ask three of you, Sophia, Rob, and John in particular. So your customers are people who are looking for basically a positive experience, right? They want to get on a cruise ship, they want to get on an airplane, they want to spend a nice day at the zoo. How do you communicate this subject in a serious way that really helps motivate them and engage them, but have them also remember? So Sophia, let me start with you.
Sophia from JetBlue. The aviation industry once did a focus group on how people want to hear messages around environmental work and airplanes. And the quote that I remember is a guy who said, "I'm on vacation, I don't want to save anything." So with that frame of reference, we focus all our work on this across the board for all environmental. 1, clear. 2, positive. 3, actionable. It has to end with relevance to their life.
That's good. Simple, clear starting point. Rob, so let's hear from you. Just a couple months ago, WWF and Royal Caribbean launched a partnership aimed at addressing issues across a range of sustainability issues within your company. You've now added wildlife to that set of issues, which is terrific. Tell us about how you're taking this on and specifically beginning to develop the materials to reach out to your customers on the wildlife trafficking issue.
Hi, everyone. Our cruise line takes about 5 million people a year to every continent on the planet across every ocean that we have. A lot of our guests are stopping in 3 or 4 or 5 ports of call along the way. We call it about 500 ports around the world every year. And for them, as Sophia said, it's a vacation. And a vacation is a good thing and a positive thing and something you look forward to. We believe that bringing along good messages about what you can do to help those places and help preserve those places is every bit as positive as any other message we can come up with. We don't think there's a need for it to be grim or scary. In fact, what people take home from a vacation are not only souvenirs, but they take home the things that they learned. And if they come home able to talk about what they learned, about what they can do to preserve the environment, to preserve wildlife, to behave more responsibly, that becomes the stories that they tell their friends and their neighbors. So part of our interest in this partnership was that we were able to basically take those 5 million people a year, do what we can to help educate, and then hopefully turn all of those people into ambassadors that can spread a public interest message in the same way that we learned how to buckle our seatbelts or stop smoking. Some of the practical things we do, WWF has helped and produced magazines that are in staterooms that all of our guests have access to, among many other things that we're doing to communicate to our guests. But a simple sheet that talks about when you're in port, try and do this, try not to do that. If you come across this item, think twice. That's basic, useful, helpful information that our guests can put into use right away, and probably that they can remember not only on this vacation, but any other one that they take. The print channel is one that we have. We also have Stateroom TV that offers the same information, and even lectures that we give to our guests before they go into a port that can underscore these messages. So it can be friendly, welcome. It's a time of your life when you're on vacation thinking about some of these things in a way that you might not at other times. It's a great time to educate.
David mentioned earlier the commitment you all have made to training your 60,000 plus employees. Can you say a word about that? That's a big workforce.
It's a big workforce, and it's one that cares about this as much as the rest of us. When we started going down this road, we surveyed not only a large number of our guests, but also our crew, who come from about 140 countries around the world. And the number one, this will sound obvious as soon as I say it, but when you get a survey back that says, what should we be doing as a cruise line to help the world, when 63% of everybody says save the oceans, and second place is 11%, you can consider that message stamped on our forehead. So even the way that we talk about things, we kicked off our partnership with WWF at a small fishing village in the Philippines called Donsul that has a model sustainable tourism program involving swimming with whale sharks. It is no place a ship of ours could ever stop. It's a very, very small town. But we knew that by kicking it off there and by sending the message out that our CEO was there and that we were making a contribution to that program, we sent a message to 15,000 Filipino crew members we have that we get it. We understand what you care about. We care about the same thing. And if we all kind of go at this together, we might be able to make some progress.
John, WCS, of course, runs the Bronx Zoo, which is one of the most famous zoos in the world. You get over 2 million visitors a year on average. What are you doing that's different on this issue? It's something, I mean, in some ways you might say you're preaching to the converted. At least people that come to zoos obviously like animals. So what are you doing that's really catching the attention, or are they planning on doing?
Well, before I actually said anything, I wanted to say that I was the individual that was interviewed for Sophia, for you to say, when I go on vacation, I just want to go on vacation. I was laughing. I think I did fill that out. Wildlife Conservation Society has been around for 121 years, and we were founded really with two purposes. One was to educate people about conservation, zoology, and wildlife, which was the hubris of New York, the greatest zoological garden in the world, which is the Bronx Zoo, but really was also to save wildlife and wild places around the world. And we work in over 60 countries. And our scientists working with WWF and AWF had really done some of the seminal research to show those incredible drops, a 62% drop in forest elephants. So our scientists were the ones that came to us. So we have this kind of very interesting, you would say, eclectic, or we would say complementary components of our organization that allow us to speak to people literally from cradle to cane. I don't want to say to grave, to cane. And if we could just go to the next slide, what you'll find here is that we need to figure out a way to get that message across to the 6-year-old that comes into the park with their families, to not scare them. And this morning at the White House, we were there with representatives from the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which we partner with. There's 180 million people that go to zoos every year. So AZA becomes a very important way for us to get our message across about what we're trying to do. And fundamentally, it's really around stop the killing, stop the trafficking, and stop the demand. These are the 3 pillars of what we've done, and we launched a campaign called 96 Elephants. Secretary Jewell's interesting in her comments earlier was saying every 15 minutes an elephant is being killed. Well, that works out to 96 a day. So that simple kind of messaging really worked. And if you see behind us, what we did was we worked with young kids to actually do drawings at the park. And what we did with those drawings was we actually sent them to Governor Cuomo in New York. And when I met with the governor, he said, Calvello, you have no shame, and which is true when it comes to these issues. But what we also did is we had their parents sign petitions as well. So what we did was something very actionable, where children could participate, tell their story in their own words, but at the same time also engage the parents. What you have here behind us is a slide from, again, Secretary Jewell referenced the ivory crush in New York City. this was one of the ways that we were able to engage our visitors in participating in this and inviting them to participate. We had over 1,500 people come to that one crush. So I think what we found, and another example is World Elephant Day, which we literally as a community, and that wasn't WCS, it's WWF and AWF and so many others, coming together to tell this story. Now, in that moment, we were approached by the next individual who will take us a little bit off in a different direction, but it talks about how celebrities can play a very important role in helping tell the story, and I think you all know who this is.
Stop killing 96 elephants every day just because of this ivory. Let's get rid of the demand once and for all.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, he blew up a ivory tusk. And when I saw this the first time, I said, what is going to happen? 1.3 million people watched that in one day, in 2 days, actually. And that was completely viral because, unfortunately, we don't have the budgets to be able to go out and buy advertising, but we were able to use that as a way to tell that story. That generated 85,000 letters to Congress to help implement the regulations to ban the sale of ivory.
Great. I hadn't seen that. Very good. Where did he do that blowing up? Where was that, actually?
He does this, it's a long story, but he blows things up kind of as a hobby.
Okay.
We just got into the routine with him.
Fascinating. Thank you, John.
On another note, I must say, Billy Joel also, the piano man, also spoke out on this issue as well and did a lovely piece for us. I needed to give some balance to that.
Play the song later, right? So one of the other sectors that was represented at the White House today, and you heard reference to it earlier, is the adventure travel sector. Some of our corporate partners, Natural Habitat Adventures and the Adventure Travel Trade Association, have made important commitments to educating their customers. And these are companies that go to the places where often the poaching is happening. And so they're an important vehicle for really helping through those channels to raise awareness and get customers to change their buying habits. Patrick, you're obviously an organization that is centered in Africa, based on the ground, and I know you've often reminded us that we really need to make sure we engage communities in the right way as part of the supply chain, as part of our consumer awareness efforts, and really engaging communities as allies, as Undersecretary Novelli was saying earlier. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with AWF in Africa?
Sure, thanks, Jeanette. I was thinking of when David Hayes greeted us this morning and said when President Obama issued the executive order, he ordered that the U.S. government take an all-of-government approach. And just listening to the last panel and this panel, what Royal Caribbean's doing and JetBlue and WCS and WWF, it occurs to me more and more that this U.S. Wildlife Trafficking Alliance is about an all-of-society approach, which is what we really need. It's all of society. It's consumers, it's business people, it's NGOs, but indeed, I do make the point, Jeanette, that one of my concerns, I want to tell you a quick story that I was at World Economic Forum, and I got called in by, Professor Schwab, the founder of Davos. And he said, Patrick, I've just been up at Kruger, they're still losing rhinos. I was with Prince William last week, I know what he's doing. What's still missing here? What's the missing piece? And I've told him the same thing we've all said here, it's all the above, we need all the above. However, we do have a concern in AWF that if you look at Africa, which is where we're focused, Africa is now the youngest population in the world. It's not the Africans we used to think of. It's increasingly urban. It's increasingly sophisticated. It's increasingly tech savvy. And they see Arnold Schwarzenegger and they think, yeah, he's on board. Jackie Chan's on board. Prince William's on board. Where is the African leadership on this issue? Where's the African ownership of this issue? And Professor Schwab said to me, I have in the room tomorrow 80 of what World Economic Forum calls our global shapers. They are the young 25 to 30-year-olds, the entrepreneurs from all over the continent. They're the ones writing the future of this continent. I want you to come in with me tomorrow and tell them what you just told me about how Africans have to take ownership of this issue and not sort of leave it to Western celebrities to be the great champions of wildlife. So that's a group we're working with, sort of not the usual suspects, but trying to make sure, and when I talk to young Africans, they often say, no one's ever invited us to take an interest in this issue. It seems like this space has been claimed by other people. Then I just want to mention a second group that these young Africans told us. They said, you know what, China is a big factor in this trade as well. And if NGOs speak up, the Chinese government, are not famous for necessarily taking NGOs too seriously. And they said, but the people you need to work with is that each of our nations are represented in China. So I went to Beijing last February and got 38 African ambassadors to sit down to lunch with me. And I asked these ambassadors, may I ask respectfully, Your Excellencies, when you speak to the Chinese government, do you ever include wildlife and natural resources in your remarks? And they said, well, no, Patrick, honestly, no one's ever asked us to do that. And I said, well, with your permission, I'm here to give you some background on what's happening to the resources in Africa and to equip you. And after 4 repeat visits and meetings with the African ambassadors, they agreed to put on the agenda for the FOCAC meeting, which this slide comes from, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the big summit that happened in Johannesburg in December, for the very first time ever, and this builds on what Undersecretary Novelli was speaking about, the joint commitment by the U.S. and China. Now, not only is the U.S. government asking China to take this issue seriously, 38 African ambassadors are going to the Chinese government and saying, we, the African governments, want this to be part of the way that we work with China, cooperation on protecting Africa's wildlife and wildlands. So to me, it's inspiring. We need to approach a tipping point here. We need a tipping point where we turn on this. And when we have government and NGOs and young African leaders and the visitors and clients of JetBlue and Royal Caribbean all working together, it just gives me hope that we will reach that tipping point.
Now, you also work on a unique way with another effective messenger, which is sniffer dogs, and I'm looking at the lovely picture on the screen here, and some of our other organizations as well do. Could you talk a little bit about how that is working and the role of that interesting channel in educating and deterring, I think, consumers to buy products?
Thanks, Jeanette. Just in all honesty, I sort of asked that we force this one in here because this is really a law enforcement thing, but is also
easy
about...
for you.
Thanks for that. I want to tell you that, again, many organizations, but AWF, we sort of basically bought out a canine security company in Africa, and we're training young Africans and dogs. People have talked a lot about the role of technology. I think technology is very important. One technology we're extremely interested in is a dog's nose. These dogs are being placed in airports and seaports and key border crossings around the continent, and they are finding ivory. This dog, Ashja, and this handler, on March 31st, discovered 62 kilos of ivory going through Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi and pangolin, giant pangolin, which Secretary Jewell referred to. But what I wanted to mention is I think about, again, visitors, international travelers, and tourists, is that they also have a public awareness and education role. It's not just about the interceptions and the discoveries. It's about people seeing these dogs in the airport working, and you kind of think, well, what are they looking for? Is it drugs? Is it agriculture products? No, it's wildlife. This dog's wearing a collar, that shows it's part of a wildlife protection program. And that deterrence and education for the consumer goes, oh, I get it. We're all in this together. The governments are taking this seriously. Our industry's taking it seriously. Our carriers taking this seriously. I want to be a part of this. So I think the dogs are actually part of the public awareness as well.
Jeanette, I just wanted to follow up briefly on what he said because I think Patrick's absolutely right. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that in September of 2013, when we launched 96 Elephants in the campaign, at the meeting, actually we were there together, there were actually 7 African leaders there calling on us to stop buying ivory. And I think that's an important statement to be made, that this whole movement, at least for us, for WCS and for many of the organizations, began at that seminal Clinton Global Initiative meeting where we started to discuss these issues and have Africans raise that issue. I also think it's important to, and it hasn't been mentioned by any panelist yet, is that every 4 days, a ranger is killed in Africa. This is not a crisis just of these poor animals, but it's human beings. And again, I would be very remiss. One of my colleagues, a partner of ours in Congo, one of the rangers was killed on March 31st. So that this is something that we're all living with. Every one of our organizations on the ground has stories, unfortunately, like this.
Absolutely. Sophia, did you?
Yeah, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I wanted to say that I'm kind of jealous you guys get elephants and rhinos, because I find it harder to take this messaging to the more subtle Caribbean animals. And the folks that we're communicating with, in general, are not eating shark fin soup. In general, they're not doing the obvious things, and we don't get these kind of iconic species, so it becomes, a much more subtle and tricky communications. I would love to be able to blow something up in a PSA.
We'd love to see JetBlue come to Africa and have more direct connections. Yeah.
See, I'm conflicted because Schwarzenegger gives me a problem with our membership on the coalition to stop blowing things up.
I would say, though, that I think we need to stop being as rigid in some sense, in the sense that if we are talking about ivory, but working with our partners at Vulcan Philanthropies and NRDC and IFAW, we've been working and using the elephant as a mechanism to pass bills around the country to ban the sale of ivory and other illegal wildlife products. So let's take advantage, unfortunately, of this moment in time where elephants are in the news and rhinos are in the news to tell a broader story, so that Nassau grouper can make it back.
Right. And that's one thing I'm happy to see the Caribbean region copying or borrowing heavily from the Africa region, is how tourists and our customers and clients can engage with these species without buying them. And that's, quite frankly, offering them as a service. And to a certain extent, these animals will always be commoditized. So because with that frame of reference, how can the folks coming on our vessels interact with them? And that's where I turn to your groups and say, set those tours up in the Caribbean. Do that for our regions.
I'm committed to going on any tour that you need me to go on. I just want to say that right now.
John is ready. Okay, Patrick, go ahead.
I just wanted to contribute a little bit to Sophia's comment as well, to say that, again, I was in Beijing and speaking to the leader of a think tank there. And he said to me, Patrick, if you'd come here 10 years ago, there was no literacy. You couldn't have this conversation with people. There's now been work done on tiger. There's been work done on shark fin soup. There's been work done on bear gallbladder. So when you come and start speaking about elephant and rhino now, there's a basic literacy. So I think, building on what John said as well, we need literacy among the modern, sophisticated tourists and travelers of the world to be aware of these issues. And then, of course, the species will differ by geographical region, but we can work together on sort of that basic literacy that makes them sensitive to these issues.
I have a question for any and all of you, and that is, what other sectors, I'm thinking of the private sector, do we think are ripe for action? We've got e-commerce in the alliance, we have travel and tourism, we have jewelry, we have fashion. What other sectors what's missing? How can we collectively reach out and make progress with other sectors? Any thoughts on that?
I'm sure you guys have a long list. The folks that I always think of are the hotels. And they do a lot of work on that in the food category, but they're forced into a slightly awkward space, like at least I can say for JetBlue. We're not going to be opening customers' bags. We're not going to be policing. That's a science. That's an industry that's not us. So it goes back to your original question of this constant soft messaging that's about how to engage with the animals as a service, as a natural attraction that's unique to the destination without touching them.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually look at some of the work that WWF has done and others have done with the religious community. And I know we have not spoken about this, but if we're really trying to deal with the demand question, it may be an interesting sector to engage within the alliance to help tell that story in a very effective way.
Mm-hmm. Patrick.
Well, I just wanted to mention an obvious one, which is shipping. I mean, when you talk about a wildlife product moving, it's moving in one of two ways: either accompanied, which is to say it's in somebody's baggage, they're going with it and so forth, or they've shipped it. And I know the Royal Foundation and United for Wildlife, the UK group, I think has done quite a bit of work around this, but we're concerned about port logistics, shipping companies. We just held a board meeting in Hong Kong, and to watch containers just sort of piled up as high as the eye can see, and to think, how many dead elephants are out there, or how many pangolins are out there. So shipping and logistics companies are, I think, a high priority.
It's worth noting that USAID has, in fact, supported a big project that's called Routes, that some of the organizations and companies here are involved in, that is targeting the transport sector, including logistics. So, and that's just getting going, so hopefully we'll see some good progress through that.
No, I was just listening enthusiastically.
Let me ask another question for any of you. And picking up on comments that were made around China, other countries. Obviously, we do have a problem here at home. As Secretary Jewell pointed out, the U.S. is a major consumer of wildlife, and we have to take that seriously, and we are, which is terrific. What are your thoughts about, I guess two questions, your thoughts about what you can do within your actions to influence the activities, the issue in other countries, and particularly thinking of the private sector, our companies here today, and what else can be done generally to up this issue outside of the U.S.? How are you thinking about that sort of globally?
China is a rapidly growing market in our industry, and I was speaking earlier that one of the interesting things is our China market is mostly Chinese consumers cruising with us. So as opposed to what you might think of taking American guests to see China, we're actually taking Chinese guests to see Korea, Japan, and other parts in the region. And I think that the most important thing is to not alter course based on who is on the ship. So those same messages and those same magazines will be there. The mixing of cultures that takes place with travel is very important for all of us, and whether it's being exposed to the culture of the country that you're visiting or whether it's being exposed to the culture of the other people on your ship, just increases more opportunities for people to learn from each other.
I actually see the growth of international customers on this issue as both our biggest possibility and our biggest risk. So if you think it's hard to communicate to someone on vacation, try doing it in another language or cross-culturally. And yes, of course, as a travel industry, as a company in the travel industry, it's all about positive interactions between different cultures. But we also want to make sure not to import bad habits and not to export bad habits, to play both sides of the aisle. And I think about that issue not just with China, but also with Cuba, which has obviously opened up, and I expect that this will be a big issue for the whole region. And I'm quite frankly glad to have partnerships with nonprofits, with government, with a deep relationship through an MOU with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because those are the folks that I'm going to be turning to and saying, guide me, tell me what's relevant, tell me what the science is, so I'm making goals based on your information.
I just wanted to echo the comments that have been made, and National Geographic Society did a seminal research over the last year on that spanned 5 countries in terms of their thoughts about purchasing ivory and why they purchase ivory, and using that as an example in terms of what's happening from a wildlife trafficking perspective. We can learn from that. I think picking up on the major themes today, it's really about educating and informing. But let's not forget that the work that we collectively did over the past year really helped reinforce the U.S. government's role. And I think there's a couple of other opportunities coming up over the next 6 months. There's going to be a World Conservation Congress that is going to be happening in Hawaii, where representatives from around the planet will be there to talk about conservation. There's a motion on the floor there to close markets and to talk about wildlife trafficking. There's a similar movement right now being launched by Gabon for CITES, which is going to be happening later in the year, actually 2 weeks after the World Conservation Congress. So we've got 2 opportunities in this year to help tell that story and to reinforce those messages at a global scale.
I think 2 quick comments I'd like to make. I mean, I noticed from people writing to us and our members and so forth, so often people do take a simplistic view, and they're like, dang it, if I could find one of those poachers, I'd like to see them strung up. And it's helping to educate people, the poacher, the person who might actually hold the gun, is unfortunately probably a poor, I mean, I don't condone it obviously at all, but it might be a poor African who's been manipulated and taken advantage of, and if you put that person in jail, there's 10 people standing behind him. Helping people understand it's not just get the poacher. We're all complicit in this. The traders, the business people, the people who are lax at airports and seaports, and so educating people around the world. And then a second key thing, again, Undersecretary Novelli referred to this kind of landmark meeting in Arusha with a number of countries present. I was at that. And one of the big concerns is that people are talking, but people are not going to jail enough. There are a few cases, but we need to see more people going to jail. I am proud as an American, if you look at the task force and the advisory council and now the United States Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, that we have consistently tried to do what Secretary Jewell said, which is first we look at our own house, try to get it right, try to find out places we need to pull up our socks, then ask other nations to do more. I know we're trying to strengthen our own prosecution. We need to ask nations around the world to take prosecution of wildlife crimes seriously. If someone steals a Land Cruiser, that's serious. A rhino, not such a big deal. It's just an animal, right? We need to change that perception by prosecutors and countries to have the political will to prosecute wildlife crime.
Thank you. That's great. Let me ask one question that's going to maybe put you guys on the spot a little bit, but I'd like to hear from each of you. How do you intend to ensure that this issue, if you intend to ensure that this issue is mainstreamed in your organization? And how will you measure your success, your progress on the commitments you've made? Over my time working in conservation over many years now, this issue has kind of come and gone. Now it's back in full force. We haven't seen a crisis like this really ever, the poaching crisis. But it's a big issue right now. Who knows where we'll be in 2 or 3, 4 years. But if we're going to break the cycle, we need to see consistent effort. So I'd love to hear thoughts on how you're going to ensure that it's mainstreamed and is taken seriously, if I could.
Well, first, that's a pretty good hashtag, so we can make use of that. One of the things I'm learning being in a company at the top of its food chain is that when we start to take actions along this front, we have a lot of suppliers who notice. And among the things that we're heading into with WWF's help is increasing the percentage of MSC and FSC certification for seafood that is served on our ships. There are a whole lot of people who would love to get a contract to sell that to us. If they know that we're paying attention to it, they're going to start paying attention to it. In fact, we had a conversation earlier today about the number of vendors who have reached out to our purchasing department since we began this conversation, telling us things we didn't know about them that they were engaged in. So it was a handshake waiting to happen. We just didn't know that the two parties were looking for it. And I think on this front, we work with thousands of tour operators around the world. They're going to notice what we're paying attention to, and I think they're going to start paying attention to it as well. So if we can start a conversation, then we can certainly continue one, and I think a lot of people are ready to listen.
Thank you. Sophia?
The reason I know this issue is going to stick around for JetBlue is because when we're working on it internally, it's not animal trafficking in isolation. It's two things: keeping the destinations we fly people to unique, and connecting with our customers as they become more values-based. As long as we continue to wrap it in that, it'll always be around and it'll always be a key part of our business.
I kind of have no choice. It's the Wildlife Conservation Society, so I think we're pretty much committed to this long term. But all kidding aside, one of the things that we've been doing is working very closely with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. They are our partner on the Alliance commitment to educate and inform these hundreds of millions of people that are coming through. I think it's important to understand that for the longest time, people viewed that as an experience. You'd go to the zoo and you'd kind of have this sense of inspiration. Well, we need to move that to action. So how do we engage these visitors to do more and feel that sense that they need to live their values in a much more concrete way? Again, we have made the commitment, and I see colleagues that have left us, like James Deutsch, but who was our director of Africa. And at the time, what we've committed to doing is looking at sites specifically throughout Africa where there are significant populations of elephants, and making sure that we're on the ground working with our partners to ensure that there is long-term sustainable populations of elephants.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think I'll also answer the question a little bit differently like John did, which is to say, I know, Jeanette, when I meet with you or I meet with John, we're going to agree on 97% of all issues. And so the big meetings that John talked about, CITES and the Conservation Congress, I'm not going to them. We'll be represented there, but I think this is an important message for conservation. We can't fill the room with the choir and talk to each other and feel like we're making progress. We need to go out there and proselytize to others. So I'm going to things like World Economic Forum, like the Africa CEO Forum, not ministers of the environment, ministers of finance and planning. Who are the people really making the decisions about what the continents can look like in the future? I think we have to have a very much an outward-looking mentality, and this idea of mainstreaming conservation issues in the larger economic growth and planning agenda, not just conservation-minded folks talking to each other and feeling like that's progress in itself.
Well said. Thank you very much, Patrick. Okay, so I want to thank our panelists very much for your great remarks. But I am gonna give John the last word here. I think you have something you want to share, John. I think so. We're going to let you do it as a segue to our next panel, which is about broader outreach and campaigning on this issue.
So
take it away, John.
apologies to everyone here, because this is really for very much of a U.S. market, but it's something that hopefully, if the message is clear, maybe it could be used in other places. And as my colleague to my left referenced, we are becoming much more of an urban community. So 96 Elephants has about 200 partners in 45 states now. And one of the things that we've been doing is every year the campaign is focused on a specific area. Join the herd the first year, take a stand the second year, and this year our focus is stop the crime. And we've launched, we will be launching, actually, you are the first group to actually see this new advertisement that we put out. And I'd like you to watch, and then I can explain a little bit more. But it's really about trying to do this in a way and get this message across without using some of the horrific images. And curious to hear what you think.
Too many teardrops for one heart to carry on.
96 elephants are killed every day. And we're not crying loud enough.
You're gonna cry 96 tears. You're gonna cry 96 tears.
So just curious, what did you think? That, for you music lovers out there, that was Question Mark and the Mysterians. That was a song that actually started the punk rock movement back in the late 60s, early 70s. We brought him out of retirement, and he was generous enough to give us that song for this image. But again, the imagery of this idea of a crime being committed, how do we break through in such a cluttered environment to tell that story in a way that people can quickly grasp? And our hope is that when World Elephant Day comes around, we can use this moment to potentially have places around the country, or dare I say around the globe, doing a chalk outline similar to the one you saw there, to continue to bring that message across, raise awareness, and talk about wildlife trafficking. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you, John, and thanks again to our panelists. Great comments. Third panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gavin Shire. I'm the Chief of Public Affairs for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's my very great pleasure to be moderating this last panel of the day with three national communications leaders. We've heard a lot already about success stories that show the ways that governments, non-profit organizations, and for-profit corporations are working together on this vitally important issue of wildlife trafficking. This panel will address how we package all of that great work into powerful messages, effective messages to raise awareness of the problem and the solutions. All of the companies and organizations represented on this panel are members of the U.S. Wildlife Trafficking Alliance and part of the communications effort to bring awareness to broad audiences. National Geographic and WildAid are key NGO partners of the Alliance. And just last month, on World Wildlife Day, Google announced commitments to combat wildlife trafficking, along with 15 other companies, as David Hayes mentioned in his introductory remarks. Discovery Communications is also a member and has made strong commitments to the issue. We had originally planned to have them on the represented on the panel here today. Unfortunately, due to a last-minute scheduling conflict, they were unable to attend. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking with our panelists about their experiences communicating the wildlife trafficking issue and ways they're currently working both separately and under the umbrella of the Alliance to reach broad audiences and raise awareness across the country and the world. I'll be asking our panelists general questions to get the ball rolling, questions that I hope will be probing and provocative. If I'm not probing and provocative enough, I hope to have a little bit of time left at the end for you all to ask some questions and take the mic from me. So let me begin by introducing the panelists here with me today, starting on my left with Susan Goldberg, who is the editorial director for National Geographic Partners and editor-in-chief of National Geographic magazine. John Baker is managing director at Wild Aid, and Johanna Shelton is director for public policy and government relations at Google. Welcome. So let me move right into our first general question, and by way of introduction, I'm hoping that perhaps you each could tell us briefly about how you're working to reach broad audiences, shift consumer behavior, and stop the demand for illegal wildlife products. So Susan, let's begin with you. Right here.
Hordes of...
Should I go first? I should go first. Okay. Because that other thing sounded cool, but it wasn't mine. No, that's fine. You know, I'm at National Geographic. We storytell across all platforms. We're #1 social media brand in the United States. We put out messages to the public every day. So, of course, I believe that storytelling is the way into this subject. And we do believe that storytelling can change the world at National Geographic. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of stories that we've been working on involving the wildlife trade and a group of folks that we set up to try to enlighten people on this even more. So this is a story that we've got coming up in July, and it's on Virunga National Park in the Congo, and it is the most dangerous park in the world in which to practice conservation. I think 150 rangers have been killed over the last 10 years, and as you can see, these rangers are, you know, look like soldiers more than rangers in their effort to protect the gorillas and the elephants. You know, another picture from Virunga, these are orphaned gorillas, and they spend all of their time with the rangers who are trying to teach them how to get along in the wild. This is from a story, actually, we did last year called Tracking Ivory. It was part of our wildlife crime investigation unit. And this is a cache of ivory seized in Virunga. You know, another picture from there with all of this seized ivory. This is from a story we did a few years ago called Blood Ivory. And I think the difficulty in some of these pictures is why this is a hard story to tell, right? This is not something that people can embrace. So this is one kind of storytelling that we can do with some of these very difficult pictures. But there's a lot of opportunity to tell stories in different ways, and I think Terry Garcia this morning talked a little bit about PhotoArc, which is a wonderful project by our photographer Joel Sartori, who's taking portraits of animals, and that is another way that we can make the point to people. Now, this is taken by our photographer, Tim Lehman, who's been working on telling a story about orangutans. This story will appear next year. And this is in Borneo, and these are juvenile orangutans who've been rescued because their parents have either been killed by hunters or loss of habitat. And, you know, it's just amazing to see pictures like this. I mean, I know, so everybody's heart goes out to these. And the saddest part of this picture is every single one of these babies means a dead mother. And that's what people need to understand when they see that. You know, Another story we're going to tell next year that is, I think, a very important but a tough story also is called Poisoning Africa. So here you've got these tribesmen who are herding their cows onto national parks, which is, of course, against the law, but they do it anyway. And of course, some of those cows get attacked by lions or other animals. And so what they do is they put poison on the cow, and leads to this indiscriminate killing of animals all over Africa. So for every animal that's poisoned to lure predators who then die, it's 100 animals die for every dead cow. So here you've got some birds that were killed. This is a lion who ate the poison and later was trampled to death by a herd of animals and had to be put down. And then finally, here is a story that we're going to do later this year on rhinos, and we're going to get behind the effort of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife operation. It's called Operation Crash, and it's the program to stop rhino horn trafficking. These are some pictures that ran with a story that we did a few years ago, but you can see this dehorned rhino. The female rhino there was almost killed in an illegal dehorning by poachers. They're playing, they're cute. Rhinos usually don't look that cute, but I think this one is really cute. And this is an effort by a veterinarian to dehorn a rhino to make sure that that poaching can be deterred. A tusk like this can bring up to $360,000 or something like that on the black market. I think this weighs about 8 pounds. Just some of these rhinos recovering here. We've got another story this summer, a series of stories about sharks. And one of the things we're going to talk about is how this apex predator is now endangered in part because of the demand on things like shark fin soup. And then finally, I'd just like to mention that we have set up a blog called Wildlife Watch, and every day, we've got stories about animals and about wildlife trafficking and about the victories against wildlife traffickers. So we're doing stories in the long term, and we're doing stories in the short term. These are our bloggers and writers who are working on these stories on a regular basis, but we are doing these stories all the time as part of the daily mix of our content, because I think that's the way that we can make a difference at National Geographic.
Thank you. John, hoping we're back in order with the audio-visual.
I have control now. Yeah, nothing cuter than a baby rhino. So I'm from WildAid, and WildAid has primarily focused on reducing the demand for wildlife products in Asia. We've been working in China for over 10 years, and we're now starting the process of thinking about how we could use what we've been doing overseas here in the US. So some of the things that have worked in China so far have been a campaign we ran on shark fin soup, and most recently a campaign that we've been doing on ivory has started to gain some traction too, thankfully. But to talk a little bit about how we try to reach this audience of people who are not already interested in wildlife or who may not really know much about wildlife or our impacts on wildlife. We've heard a little bit from previous speakers sort of alluding to this already, but what we found in China was that actually the awareness levels were quite low. And so we did emphasize the idea of making people more aware. The word in Mandarin for shark fin soup is actually fish wing soup. So many people actually didn't really know where shark fin soup came from. Obviously some did, but not everyone. It wasn't inherent in the name. So simple campaigns to raise awareness around where it comes from, what's the impact of this, obviously has helped us to get to the point where we are today. And again, for an international group working in a place like China, the idea is how do you reach these people? How do you break through their day-to-day lives and make this an issue that they should know more about and care about. So we, of course, focused on working with Chinese personalities, people that the Chinese audience and community would respond to. So people like Jackie Chan and Yao Ming. Again, Yao Ming is known here a little bit, and actually today he was, I think, inducted in the Hall of Fame. So congrats to Yao Ming. But he led their Olympic delegation at the Beijing Olympics and was very much a hero to them as an athlete who went overseas and played in professional sports in the US and came home. He's, of course, been able to live a life without scandal, which is another hazard of working with celebrities. But so he's maintained and he's built up his credibility through sincere passion for the cause. And when he retired from professional sports, he actually had more time then to work on wildlife issues. So he became more active and actually is a delegate on a policy-making body that's affiliated with the National People's Congress, and he's put forward a proposal to ban the sale of ivory. This was almost 2 years ago now. So he's quite doing it for real, not just sort of as a marketing thing. But the reason I mentioned Yao Ming and the campaign on shark fin soup is really this whole idea of how do you get to the people who aren't already watching the National Geographic Channel or who aren't already interested in wildlife. And when we do our surveys now, tracking the increased awareness and people's behavior change around shark fin soup, we all ask, what made you change? And they all say Yao Ming. So it makes it easy for us to track our campaign because he's only been working with us on that campaign. Anyway, now here we are looking at it for the US market. And I just wanted to show one video that's part of our new China campaign on ivory, just to give you a sense of the kind of work we do and how we do it. Okay. Who controls the order? Oh, okay. Bear with me. You can just go to that first one I had.
Please, be ivory free. Because when the buying stops, the killing can too. Hordes of relentless killers.
It's not a fictional future.
They are here, now. They're not driven by hunger.
They're driven by money.
Money paid for ivory carvings.
And trinkets.
We can't stop them with force.
More will just follow.
The only cure is to end the demand for ivory.
You can help.
You can help.
Tell your friends and family to be ivory free.
Be ivory free.
Don't buy, give, or accept any ivory.
And the elephants will survive.
Because when the buying stops...
When the buying stops, the killing can too.
The killing can too.
I didn't mean to have to show both of those in a row. For those who watched the Walking Dead finale, that was supposed to be the treat I was offering you. In terms of how we're trying to adapt what has worked for us in Asia for the US audience. The Walking Dead is actually popular in China too. What I wanted to say about Lang Lang and the pianist who did the Ivory PSA for us, and a campaign that was in collaboration with the African Wildlife Foundation and Save the Elephants. And now that we're bringing that to the U.S., we're working together with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in a campaign that we'll be launching later this year. And we're looking at new messages for the U.S. audience, for the audience of people who aren't already watching the nature shows. The cast of The Walking Dead was one of the groups who were willing to work with us and bring this message. And we had all kinds of discussions about the zombies and the vampires and how we could get them both to work together. So there's more to come in that front. An increasingly popular genre these days. Anyway, I'm going to keep it at this and hand it over.
Johanna, if you could tell us about the space that Google is working in.
Sure. We were really excited to be a part of the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance and to join with the other companies in making commitments, each company doing it in their own way. Google's interest in this is very multifaceted. Obviously, as a search engine, our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful to our users. So getting users the best information about things they might be searching for is obviously our core. But we also come at this as an advertising company. Our current ad practices ban promotion of products that are derived from threatened or endangered species, and that's with Google Shopping as well, which was mentioned earlier. We also come out to this as a company that has platforms and products used, multiple platforms and products used by more than 1 billion people around the world. That includes YouTube, which is used by more than 1 billion people, 1/3 of the internet on an active basis. It reaches more 18 to 49-year-olds than any cable network that is out there. And every minute we have 400 hours of video uploaded to YouTube. So the scale of YouTube is pretty phenomenal. There's a lot of wildlife to be found on it. Some would say there's far too many cats flushing toilets and things on YouTube, but there's also quite a bit of really enriching content and uplifting content. And, you know, as a mother of a 7-year-old, that's where I go to broaden his world and show him things. Although thank you also for the photo arc exhibit, because it was really phenomenal, and we've been several times because the magazine can be a little tough for his eyes, but the photo arc exhibit is really terrific. We are also doing things, doing some other products. We're trying to do marketing and partnerships in the wildlife area with some of our products that may not be as well known as things like Google, the search engine, or YouTube. We are working on Cardboard and our virtual reality platform. And for $7, you can go and get a cardboard. It was derived because we challenged some engineers. They challenged themselves to see whether they could create a virtual reality headset out of a box of pizza, and they in fact did it. So we now have a $7 version of a virtual reality headset, which you can purchase on a number of open platforms, and we have the specs out for anybody else to replicate it. But it's and then you put your phone in, and so your phone then becomes the content. And so we're working to get that kind of virtual reality into schools through a product called Expeditions, where the teacher can have a headset that is synced up with the classroom, and they can focus on going to places and seeing those places in a virtual reality way that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do in a school. And it's pretty amazing. We've taken this through Africa and some other places. It's pretty amazing to see the reaction of kids when they stand up and it becomes real to them. And it's just a really powerful picture. We also have things like with maps and Earth. We have done a partnership with Save the Elephants where we are using Street View and the Google Maps product to track in real time elephants in Africa. And so that's a combination of the use of GPS technology and other new technologies, and then making it real for people and having them be able to see in real time where the elephants are migrating, what their patterns are, and what the corridors are there. So that's a neat partnership. We just recently did one with the Association for Zoos and aquariums and Disney on the Zootopia film, so that we did it with one of our photos products, where we were taking, it wasn't elephant selfies, but selfies of animals, and I think if you Google Zoogle selfies, you'll see kids went to zoos and just took pictures of their favorite pictures of animals in connection with the Zootopia film. So we do a lot of interesting product partnerships. We also have our philanthropic efforts through our google.org. We've given $9 million in grants, and we seek to do that for nonprofits that are using technology in really creative ways to tackle the trafficking problem. So things like WWF, which has just used drones in Africa to try to follow and track poachers. Really cutting edge technologies is where we like to put that space.
Thank you very much. So let me just start with an initial question. What do you think is the biggest challenge in communicating this issue to US audiences in particular? Is it that we, as a nation, somehow feel too far removed from the problem? Or is it too complex, too overwhelming? Are we suffering from compassion fatigue? What do you think the challenges are? And Susan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned about your 7-year-old son and needing to get into that story a different way for him. And I think that's actually true of a broader audience than your 7-year-old son. I think sometimes what we have done is show a series of incredibly grim and hard to look at photos, and you almost want to just cover your eyes and run the other direction. What we've got to figure out is how to tell stories for audiences on different platforms that will work for those audiences. So with PhotoArc, for example, with these beautiful portraits of animals, we can do that in exhibits, we can do that in the magazine, we can do that in the kids magazine. We're turning that into a book. We can do it on Instagram. I mean, we can do it all over the place. But I do think that even we at National Geographic sometimes haven't been creative enough to get beyond just the documentary photography of very tough stuff to look at, to figure out, okay, how else do we get people to care? Joel Sartori, the PhotoArc photographer, has a 15-word motto for his project, and it's, I want to get people to care, I want them to fall in love, and I want them to take action. And when you think about it, that's a 15-word motto that should absolutely underlie our storytelling on this issue. And I think we do need to be more creative at drawing more audiences in.
And so in that vein, obviously the opposite of gruesome and horrific is humorous. And I'm thinking back to a piece I saw about a year ago when Jon Stewart was still doing The Daily Show. And as only Jon Stewart can, he was both angry and extremely amusing about the situation. Is there a place, and speaking as a federal government employee, I don't have a sense of humor, but for the rest of you who do, is there a place for humor in something this dark?
Well, I would just say that in the campaigns we've run, again, the main challenge is the awareness level. So it's hard to make fun of something when people don't really understand what the underlying issue is. And I was happy that with Jon Stewart, enough people knew about what was going on with Ivory that his piece actually made a lot of sense, and even more so to some of us, maybe. But that would be the first layer. We have started to use humor in some of our campaigns once we kind of got beyond the basic awareness level and got the word out that we really need to care about this. And then we start using fun and satire.
And I think it varies based on the platforms, like was said earlier. Obviously, humor it can be a huge driver. So can the negative things, particularly to a particular cause or legislative response or something like that. What we find on YouTube is actually the educational, inspirational is very, very powerful. And so, you've seen things like It Gets Better, which was a video produced in 2010, where people wanted to deliver hope and inspiration to younger people in the LGBT community. We saw pretty rapidly that video was then recreated from user-generated content videos, 50 to 50,000 times, which drove 50 million views for that model. So that is something that really works with the YouTube community in a way that has been replicated with sexual harassment and climate and some other models.
Okay. I'd also say the other piece of this is giving people actionable information so they don't just feel like it's an unfixable problem they can't do anything about. It's both then sad and unfixable, and people just tend to throw up their hands. In some ways, it's a little bit like climate change in this regard, where it feels overwhelming. So how do you draw in readers and viewers and give them the kind of information that does make them feel empowered? And I think with every story we do on these issues, we essentially need to provide a what you can do to help box, if you will, and we can do that across all of our platforms and in ways appropriate to each form of storytelling. But we've got to make people feel like they've got a place to go with this.
And let me tell you that last ending of a video, to have a where can you go, is a huge component to what drives a viral video versus other things that people just like but they don't do anything about.
Thank you. We've heard a lot of people talking today and seen a lot of imagery of the big charismatic megafauna, the elephants, the rhinos, the tigers. When it comes to the US, things like ginseng and wood products are equally, if perhaps not even more important than that. Are we missing something by not focusing enough on some of those species and focusing too much on the big elephants and rhinos? John, do you want to take that first?
Well, I would say that I think it was alluded to earlier when the literacy topic was being discussed, and how in China, 10 years ago, they barely knew about one thing, and now they know more. So we've chosen on our campaign here in the U.S. to start with elephants just because it's the thing people know. It's easy to get people's attention. Then once you can sort of build a base on that, you can start to add new information about whether it's sea turtles or frogs and amphibians or snakes or other reptiles that may be in trade, that may be impacted by trade. So that, I think, that's the way you have to go. And unfortunately, our survey shows that a lot of people do know about the rhino and the elephant, but they don't know much about all the other ones.
I think one of the things we can do to try to help people understand is to educate folks about loss of habitat, because that's one of the main reasons a lot of these animals are leaving the planet. And so it's helping people put together the pieces of the larger picture. That's where I feel like at National Geographic, that's a great role for us to play.
I think it's a great question, and these are the experts, but I do see the globalization trend and also the localization need together here. So it's a really tough challenge. I think, we see on YouTube 80% of our views are outside of the United States for the videos. On average, a video is viewed, 60% of the views of a particular video are outside of that creator's home country. So clearly, the need to tap into a broader elephant or rhino is very important to be able to get to a global conversation that particularly the millennials and others are having on a place like YouTube. But then there's also a very important piece, which is to localize it. So YouTube is in 70 countries as a localized version and in 76 different languages. And that language piece is also really important when you're talking video and getting to millennials and doing that. So we see both, and I'm please work on that and get it right.
With your help. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. One of the most difficult things about communications in general is relating the messages that we put out to our audiences with how our audiences react. In other words, measuring our effectiveness. And I'm just wondering how we're doing that in this particular realm, and are we doing enough of it?
I mean, before I came to National Geographic, I worked in the newspaper industry. And when I first started working in the newspaper industry, the way we could measure reaction is like I would go to a coffee shop and I would watch people read the newspaper. And, did they Did they go to the jump? Did they throw away the front page and just go to the sports section? I mean, so it used to be a lot cruder. Now we can actually measure what people are doing, not only what stories they're clicking on, but how far down they're getting in those stories. So we've got this incredible metrics team that every day is out there looking at our content, and so that we can lean into the content that's working or try to correct problems in real time, which is one of the great things about all things digital. You know, if we've got a story that we think is a good story, but it's not connecting, do we need to fix that headline? Does it have the right photography? Did we, you know, is it too long? Is it too short? Does it have a bad lead? So we try to fix it in real time. In terms of the magazine, I mean, not only do we have survey material from our subscribers, but frankly, I always look at newsstand sales. Although newsstand is a very small part of our overall readership, I do think it's a measure of what connects. And you know, nobody in this room is going to want to hear it, but I got to tell you, that story of ivory and elephants and poaching, that is a really tough sell on the newsstand, and we keep proving it because we think it's a really important story. So you know, you want to put it out there, you want to make people aware, but it is a very tough sell on a newsstand. It's interesting. There's a bit of a disconnect there.
Johanna?
I think the measurement question is really essential, and I think we have lots of new tools, like was just said. One of the things that we committed with the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance was our work with United for Wildlife and wildlabs.net, which is to bring conservationists and entrepreneurs and data scientists together to really look at sort of the big data aspects and what can be derived from the insights across a number of different areas of this challenge. So we're excited to see where that will go. You know, I think for the measurement, it really depends on what sort of people are looking to achieve. Obviously on YouTube or other of Google's platforms, you know, the counts and the views is a big thing. But if you're nonprofit, are you driving donations? Are you driving the type of cause of action that you want? Are you clear about what that cause of action is? And obviously, you know, I think nobody did it better than the Ice Bucket Challenge. So I'm sure everybody else is going to be trying to do that this summer. So we'll see what comes.
It's essential to measure the impact, and we do it sort of the old-fashioned way with surveys, and we also try to measure in terms of what's happening in the markets with the prices and the volumes, but also in the end of the day, it's the poaching rates. But our surveys have shown huge increases in awareness and changing of attitudes, and it can be turned around rather quickly. If you have this partnership that we were all talking about earlier in the previous panels of getting all the different companies and all sectors of society and people galvanize around a message, it can really move the needle, to borrow a phrase.
So I did promise that I'd give the opportunity to folks in the audience to ask a question or two. I think we maybe have time for one or two. So do we have the microphone available? If not, I can be Arsenio Hall and just come among you. Yep, right back. Okay, so anybody would like to ask the panel a question? Lady right here.
Good afternoon. My name is Paula Kohumbu, and I came in from Kenya for this session. And I just want to say thank you, because it's been really eye-opening what's happening in the United States compared to what's happening in Africa. In Kenya, we've had major campaigns around ending the poaching and the transiting of ivory across the country. So Kenya and Tanzania make up about 80% of the ivory that leaves Africa. And because of those campaigns, which are generally fairly not very expensive, we've been able to reduce the poaching in Kenya by 80% in just 3 years. So there's been a phenomenal success. And you know, as I'm listening to this conversation about the messaging, it's really vital. So different messaging, obviously, for different audiences. On the 30th of this month, Kenya is going to burn 105 tons of ivory. It'll be the biggest ivory burn in the history of this world. And this is a great opportunity for all of the people working on this ivory issue and the wildlife trafficking issue, because there will also be 1.5 tons of rhino horn also burned. It's a very strong message. Here's a country burning the equivalent of about, I think it's $800 million worth of ivory and rhino horn in order to say that these animals are worth more alive. So there's an opportunity now, and I'd love to hear from the panelists. How could you jump onto this opportunity, which will be attracting global leaders, global celebrities to Kenya to witness this together with Kenyans? What could we do as a global community, which is represented by many of the organizations here in the room, to actually amplify that message on the day, on the 30th of April?
Thank you. Panel?
Well, we were just having a side conversation about your question, so more to come. But thank you for bringing that to, raising the awareness again. This is what this coalition is all about, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, basically what I was suggesting is we had a previous conversation with Google team in San Francisco about doing a satellite uplink live telecast of the ivory burn using those cardboard virtual reality kits that they're building. So that's an ongoing conversation. But definitely it's a huge statement, having heads of state attending, and how to get the word out is really the key, making people really aware this is happening and the magnitude of the amount of ivory being destroyed.
We'll cover it. I mean, I see two of our reporters who cover this topic right here in this room, and even better. Thank you, Oliver, for saving me there.
Thank you. Next question.
Thanks. Thanks very much, panel. My name's Crawford Allen. I'm with Traffic. When we look at conservation, we look at things going in cycles. We see things going through trends of both funding and attention, and we see issues drop off, and we see things resurge later. I think this issue is too big for us to allow to drop off the agenda. 2 years from now, we need to have seen solid results and impact, and we need to see this crisis on a steep downward trend. I think the work that you're doing with the messaging is absolutely critical, and I salute you for what you're doing. But I do feel, it seems to me, as somebody who doesn't work really in the messaging field, it's an exhausting task for you to keep trying to figure out, how do we keep people engaged? What is the next trick or hook we can bring to get people to buy into our message? And I think that you're always looking to try and reinvent something, to come up with something. Is it virtual reality? What is the next thing? And I'd just like a little bit of a feedback of where people see this going. How are we going to sustain this? How are we going to keep the message growing into that global movement that really does not just drop off our agenda when something else shiny comes along? Thanks.
Who wants to take a first crack?
Well, I would say thanks, Crawford. One of the big challenges we have, especially in the U.S., is that people do care about what's happening to elephants and rhinos overseas, but there's not much an American can do sitting at home or in their hometown where no one's really consuming these products. So we get a lot of that feedback from our supporters. So we created, as part of our Year of the Elephant campaign that we launched on Chinese New Year, but it was part of a global campaign, we launched a social media campaign with a hashtag, because everyone needs something to do, called Join the Herd, with courtesies of WCS's original use of that phrase, and give people the opportunity to join the herd by taking a selfie photo that was then automatically input into a template with an elephant and we got 100 million views of the campaign around the world, and 100,000 people uploaded their personal photo joining the herd. People continue to join every day. We had Ellen and a lot of the Governor Cuomo and a lot of other people who you don't normally associate with the wildlife movement, people from all different countries. I'm not saying that's going to be the solution, but more of these kind of things to build on the groundswell.
I think you've put your finger on the singular challenge, really, but it's the challenge not just for this issue, but any long-term issue. It's definitely the challenge in covering climate change as well. So how do you keep getting people's interest while remaining true to the facts and not being ridiculously alarmist? I think one of the advantages that we have now is we do have so many different storytelling platforms, so you can kind of take the story and reinvent it in many different ways. We've got 14 million young people every month on Snapchat visiting our content, which is so amazing because this is a story that is right in our wheelhouse, and this is a story that young people really care about. So we can take this content and make it appropriate for different people on different platforms, and I really do think that is a huge advantage we've got now compared to 30 years ago when there weren't as many different ways to tell stories, and it just amplifies the message in such a fundamental way. I'm very encouraged by it.
And in fact, it's sort of an imperative to do that. There's about 2.9 million people on the internet right now, whether that's from desktop or mobile, and increasingly, obviously, the smartphones. It is projected in the next 5 years that we will get to 5 billion. So that is bringing on an addition, almost doubling the people on the internet. That type of audience, having information, having the awareness becomes such a vital need in a really short period of time to bring this to the developing world in the ways that make it relevant to their lives, that they realize they have a phone with a camera and they can be part of solving the equation. I think I haven't been around as long as a lot of people working on this issue, but it seems to me now is a really vital time for this alliance to come together, for us all to work on this together. So we're really pleased to be part of it.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but before we do, is the the Discovery Communications, as I said, was unable to be here today, but they did provide us with a very short piece of film that was taken during Secretary Jewell's visit to Africa. So I think we're just going to play that now to play us out. Thank you.
To the men and women of uniform of the Kenya Wildlife Service, thank you for your dedicated work and your service. As we place the wreath at the Heroes Monument, your work is difficult. It sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. It is all very important work, not only to the people of Kenya, not only to the continent of Africa, but to the people of the world. Wildlife trafficking is threatening to wipe out iconic species. Organized crime is involved, big money is involved. But what you are doing is supporting the Kenya that you know now that can be the Kenya of your children, your grandchildren, my grandchildren. So thank you. Thank you for your good work. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So these collaborative efforts will help all of us pass on the kind of world to our children that we're proud of, where iconic species will roam in the wild, not just in history books and movies, and the benefit of nature will be nurtured by man.
Thank you once again to our panelists. I think I'm going to hand it back over to David for some closing remarks.
I want to thank all of you for being here. Paula, for coming from Kenya, thank you. And I just hope, and I sincerely want to stop for a minute and say that again, thank all of you for being here and spending the afternoon with us. And please help. This is an exciting opportunity to have the collaboration that we're seeing here today with the U.S. government, with the NGO community, with media organizations, and with corporations. Working together, I think we can change behavior, and more than just elephants. Changing behavior about wildlife products, because the problem today is different than the problem tomorrow. But there's a theme here, which is protecting our globe and our living beings on the globe. So help us any way you can, whether it's through the companies you're with, through the NGOs you support, through the government you serve, and we hope that we will be able to continue to keep this coalition going and launch a truly eclectic and broad effort as was said before, to move the needle on this important topic. Thank you for being here.
Too many teardrops for one heart to be crying. Too many teardrops for one heart to carry